Thank you. Today's CPE meeting will be handled by three eminent resource persons. It's all about information technology, cyber governance, cyber fraud, and cyber IT controls. The first speaker, CA Ravi Veera Raghavan. He is a chartered accountant and certified information system auditor. He is also an eminent speaker at various business forums and industry events. Ravi Veera Raghavan is a senior partner in Deloitte Haskins & Sells LLP, and he has over 22 years of technology, management, leadership, and risk advisory experiences. He is also the technology sector leader for Deloitte Risk Advisory Practice in India. Our second speaker is CA Arjun Pratap. He is also a chartered accountant and has over 8 years of experience in risk and related services with a primary focus on control assurance, forensic risk management, and internal audit. Arjun is also a certified fraud examiner and certified information system auditor. Our third speaker for today's session is Mr. Karthik Ramkumar. He is a BE professional. He is also a certified information system auditor, has over 7.5 years of experience. Now he is the manager in risk advisory for Deloitte Haskins & Sells. His main focus on manufacturing, IT, and BPO. He has worked for Canada and UK offices of Deloitte. Over to the speakers.
Thanks, sir. Thanks for the time and welcome to the session. I'm Ravi Veera Raghavan, Arjun, and Karthik. Thanks for attending the session. So one of the topics which was given to me again, I was available for a short while only today because I'm traveling. But one of the topics which is always on the minds of so many people today is cyber. And I thought we had a session on 28th December where Madam spoke about it. So this is very primarily focused on why the three speakers. The first question I have to answer that. So this is mainly I'll talk a bit about cyber governance, and cyber governance is a growing topic from a board level. Board level perspective, what directors really think, what stakeholders are thinking, and as shareholders, what really are the questions. And some of the recent topics which are coming again, I like audience feedback as well. One of the major issues which are coming is the data leakage issue. And data leakage is becoming a very primary fundamental issue, not only for organizations, but as stakeholders, as consumers right across board. And as sector leaders, various sectors like financial services being impacted, technology is being impacted, real estate is being impacted, telecom is being impacted, all the sectors which are slowly coming into play. And one of the major issues which board now sees today, one of the major topics today is cyber. So I'll just briefly talk about some of this. I'll leave the slides with the institute also. And Arjun will be talking about cyber fraud because he's fraud examiners as well, CFE as well. So he'll talk about the latest challenges, how frauds are being brought into place, how frauds are being detected, how frauds are being reacted to. Because if you see, cyber police or cyber investigations are all now becoming far more mature. It can be tracked from trail to trail, but very importantly, how do you really go about it? When do you finally find it? Because cyber crime is now part of the day, so it has to be lived with, but how do you really face it and how do you take it forward? And Karthik will talk about cyber controls, because some of the fraud detection mechanisms, some of the IT controls, more relevant for charter governance, how IT is playing a major governance and how really you can protect it. So any thoughts on cyber governance? I'll just leave the topic for 2 minutes for the audience. Anything on cyber governance before I get into the slides? What does really boards ask? I think people would have attended audit committees. Now audit committees are becoming, you would have seen the latest article even on I think that's a Friday press. A lot of directors are now getting really nervous. Independent directors are getting really nervous. You're seeing a lot of attrition on the independent directors on the board as well. And one of the major challenges is cyber, because frauds are getting reported. So if a fraud is getting reported, then first reaction is, if it's a listed company, it has to go to the SEBI. And once the SEBI, it's a public information. a lot of questions are being put to the board. The first question is, does go to the audit committee, then the board of directors are asked, then there's a whole set of rigmarole which starts. So this challenge has been proving to be more of a nuisance, and now it's becoming a grave danger for some of the directors. And so now the hot topic today is for people to go across, what do you think should be cyber? Is it number one on the top of the list? Do you think cyber should be number two on the crime should be two on the list? And you'll see various reactions. And if you see some of the things, the attack is not only for top level companies, it is right across board. And if you see some of the SME companies, so small and medium extended enterprises, we're seeing more companies getting into the IT play. So we are seeing not only the top 100 or top 500 companies getting into the IT play, but more and more companies are getting into it, and more discussions are happening around cyber, the landscape, the security around it, whatever you name it, for mid-sector companies as well. And then there is government sector as well. Government sectors are slowly getting into more of IT governance. You see more announcements on web, email. Now GST is the latest thing which is put on the board, and how do you really react from the GST? But really speaking, if you see from a fundamental issue, 22% of board members are very confident. Now this very confident is a very interesting word. I have tested this across various audit committees. Really, how do you really react to some of these situations? And some of these situations vary. It can be a minor fraud. For example, one of the frauds which we latest saw was on a typical check embezzlement. The amount was 36 crores. It was publicly reported about 3 weeks ago on one of the listed companies in Bombay. So one of the directors were asking me, how do it really happen? Does this happen through a manual mode? Does it happen through a NEFT transfer? How does the check really get into the hands of the wrong players? But really it found out that it was more of collusion, less of IT involved. So there are various questions, and this is a fully ERP driven company, and most companies, listed companies, are going that way. More ERPs, more IT driven, more connectivity across the world, vendor evaluation across the world, and so IT is starting to play a major and dominant role, not only for the top level companies, but all companies as well. Now coming from the aspect of who are the people, so if you see the impact on the volume, now the volume is pretty huge. How do you really handle the volume from a various perspective? How do you really think from the speed of response? And do you think hackers wait? And hackers don't wait for things to happen. Hackers move at top speed. And what really happens is, from a hacking perspective, how do you really react? So one of the fundamental questions we keep asking is, there are 3 questions which the board normally asks. If I'm hit by an attack, what should I do? So the question is, if you are hit by an attack, which happens, most of the companies are hit by attacks every day. People don't report it, people are ignorant about it, or people report it but don't know what to do. The first question is their resilience. There are 3 aspects to cyber intelligence. One is the resilience. How good can this attacker really get into your system, or stay away from the system? So cyber resilience is one. Now cyber resilience is one. Once it is penetrated, how fast they can recover, how fast they can first find out the incidents happened, how fast they can recover. And the third one is the cyber change management. When all these attacks happen, how fast they can respond to it, how fast they can get around it. So between prevention, protection, and cure, these are 3 fundamental questions, which principally the board questions. Because cyber crime is not anymore a dirty word. Cyber fraud is no longer fraud, for example, is no longer a dirty word, because it happens to most of us. Most of the clients have to report. Now, for example, banks, NBFCs, and RBI. Now they are fundamentally on top of it. Most of the times today, NBFC, there's a new framework which has been introduced as per the June 7th, 2017 circular. They need a complete cyber framework, and Karthik will touch upon some of these topics. There are quite a few legislations which have been brought into play. RBI is one, NBFCs is another, IRDA is another primary body now. 138 Companies Act brought in some of them, and the Kotak Committee report. Unfortunately, the SEBI has deferred it. Last week, you would have seen a lot of announcements on SEBI has deferred the Kotak Committee report. And there's a very big paragraph on cyber. The directors on the board should be cyber intelligent, at least one of them or 2 of them. So, and there's a risk committee which has to be formed by the cyber committee. And then there are various action plans which are cyber. And there should be a subcommittee to which every quarter the board should react to it, and etc. There's a lot of intelligence now getting into cyber, most from a regulatory perspective as well. But if you see the research across board, the US regulations are slowly coming. The SEC is finally woken up and starting to regulate some of these things. SOC, there are various standards as well. ASCP is regulating. The institute has written some articles around it, but nothing regulatory perspective. So individual bodies, each individual sector is now getting into play. Privacy is there also, like GDPR is one, Global Data Protection or Privacy Act, that is coming to play. So slowly regulatory also is slowly to catch up. But fundamentally, it is there, it is already there. We need to see how best we can react and how fast we can react. Any questions? And fundamentally, if you see, we did quite a bit of research on what are the regulations. Very few regulations directly hit. And there is ISO as well, ISO framework 27001, lot of cyber things. So we have to borrow a lot of knowledge base from some of these regulations, because fundamentally when you see the NBFC regulation, do you have a framework? Does this have a policy? Does this governance really get into depth? Do they report to an audit committee? Very high level questions. Now, how do you really borrow the knowledge base? Where does it come from? Very important to understand from a cyber perspective. So some of these other things is technology, mission to protect. I'll just skip some of these slides because I'll go to the governance slide, because business is built on platforms, and fourth, threat actives. Now, threat motives varies. There are fundamentally hackers. It's called ethical hacking. So your people wait for opportunity, they keep doing it. So digital is there always, because I did a session last week for some SMEs. Digital transformation was there, robotics was talked quite a bit, and there was artificial intelligence. So most of this, when you go into artificial intelligence, there's always process in place, digitization of the process has happened, then artificial intelligence taken over. Artificial intelligence is really, end of the day, because there is computer programming, everything is taken over by a machine or a robo or et cetera, et cetera. And some of these hacking initiatives, the way the hackers think, they really hack into the programming. They really hack into the networks. So if you have a device, we have something, they know there is a program behind it, they will go after the program. There's a hardware behind it, they will go after the hardware. There is anything they want to see from a data perspective, they go after it. So there are some hackers, there is technology, but behind the technology, if you see the latest one, I think IRCTC, this public information again, which happened, which a CBI techie has hacked into the IRCT website. So I used to wonder, whenever I get into some of these trains, you see Tatkal is full, all the tickets are full, but you get into the train, it's completely vacant, and some of these were extremely vacant. And some of the answers I could read that article and find out, yes, there is a serious issue here. Because somebody's really blocked the tickets, they sell it only to the agents, because the agents get it at super speed. And that also we have tried. Agents, imagine a few hours, they will get you all the tickets and back to square one. Unfortunate, a CPE hacker has got into the IRCT website and done a lot of damage, blocked the tickets. And unfortunately, yeah, some of these websites are very, very vulnerable. For example, the banking websites. If you think your thing is secure, I don't want to name some of the banks. I've never changed my password for ages. This is a very dangerous situation. Fault on my part also. I don't know how many of you change your password regularly. Very risky. It happened to some of the banks even last year. I think on 2 banks, I don't want to name the banks. It was a network. So there was a third-party network. If you see, some of these banks operate on, most of this is outsourced. So you have an information sitting in your ATM. So the ATM is supported by a third party. So how do you really get into ATM is a third party person loads the machine, a third party person verifies the cash machine, and then the network between your bank and that ATM is through a wireless network routers. And this network is maintained by a third party again. So we see the multiplicity of outsourced vendors. And if you attack one of these outsourced vendors, your money is unsafe. And that's what happened last year when I saw so many queues happening, and what really happened is they just stole the database. The passwords came with it, therefore default for passwords. They hacked that network, which is a third-party provider of hardware. They got into the ATM, database was stolen, and there ended your security of your money. And this is some very basic issues, could have been changed. Unfortunately, now multi-factor assignment has come. Multi-factor is one of the things. Is not only your password is secure, you log into your password, you will get a email onto your telephone or whatever it is. That will be like your OTP, literally like your OTP. Every system now, not only your USRID password, but an OTP is also coming to your thing. So you cannot even operate. If your phone is not working, you really cannot get into your system. And that is called multi-factor authentication is very common today, because the data leakages which are happening left, right, and center is one of the things. Now, another example is your data. I was just looking at some of the systems. People use transport. IT companies give their own transport, etc. What really happens is, literally you have given lot of data onto the your whatever the company is. That company has shifted data to the third party provider, which is can be a X provider or Y provider, I don't want to name the providers, they have literally the whole data of you, your father, mother, address, phone number, etc. How secure is this data? And I got nervous when I was talking to somebody. I said, the background checks, we were trying to take the background checks of the drivers. Is it part of the system? And you won't believe, some of these systems don't even exist today. The drivers are all in Excel sheets. They have a scheduling sheet which is very, very primitive. And when they link it onto the person, when a scheduler comes, they should have if a lady is traveling, they should have a person on board. Then whomsoever verified, they should have the employee swiping or at least. But you see the integration of all the data very, very primitive. And then the data which these drivers have or something is phenomenally high. And you just get into 500 rupees of data, you can get the full sheet of that person. And this is how data leakage happens. Unfortunately, cybercrime, they're just waiting to take all this, and they are readily available. Some of these questions they're asking some of these companies who use the third-party providers is question. How secure is the employee data? How secure is the client data? How secure is this? Because all you know is the one person weakness and your data is out of the system. So some of these questions very difficult to answer, but you keep monitoring from time to time. I'll just stop for 2 minutes, just a question on some of these things. Cyber data is privacy, all these things are very, very unique to city, but some of these things still very primitive, especially the employee transport solutions. We are doing a lot of research. We're finding to our terrible thing that most of these systems are not even live. They're all on Excel sheets. Data can be just taken away and can be used, misused, or whatever. And very few providers of this transport are really have integrity, and that's why all these issues are coming. The background checks, I was just, I think there's a, I don't know whether it's a bunch tomorrow, the drivers. I think some of the providers are not going to drive their vehicles. One of the issues is the driver's background check has been checked out, the hours of travel is going to be cut, they are not supposed to go at certain speed. I think there's a bunch tomorrow based on this. So some of the drivers who were talking to me last week, I asked them all some of these questions, how do you know this? And he tells, if you want to, Arjun's name, his wife's name, his girlfriend's name, everything he can tell you. Because he's sitting and listening and he knows where he's getting dropped, which father, mother place, which night party he goes, because these drivers know so much of data. And unfortunately, these are drivers, right? So if they want to use you in a proper way, they'll use it. If they don't want to use it, they can use it. And this is what the challenge for some of these providers are coming. Will they sign confidential data? If you go to a driver and sign confidential data, I'm not sure whether they really understand English, because some of the security guys, again, the issue is security. They really don't understand English. Most of them are Hindi or Nepali or whomsoever it is. Very difficult to even find out what they really want. And this is the sad situation today. These are all outsourced, and some of these challenges come from this place as well. So some of the top cyber issues. Data is money. So that's what I'm talking. Data fundamentally is very powerful, because the amount of data people collect, keep, store, use, phenomenal. And that's how it is. So one of the questions is, how secure is this data? Hijack communication, some of these networks which can really get into things. So we have vulnerable VPNs and private networks, etc. Some of these solution providers, telecom providers, have been. The third party security. So that's what I was talking, the security guy to your cleaner, to your fundamental drivers and etc. How secure are they? And then the sitting targets is boards. Now key cyber information. Now one of the questions I keep asking the board members. So when you get into the board meeting, they have all these paper printouts, right? So some of the CFOs have been asking, when do you give this paper printout? So I have various answers. It's a technical rule is 10 days before the meeting, right? 10 days is the rule. They say, Ravi, we just wait. It is normally day before, not even day before, morning of the meeting. So we give it. So I said, what do you give? So the agenda is there, already circulated. So I asked the very fundamental insider information, accounts. Now financial data, how, he says, just before the meeting we hand over. I couldn't believe this is all listed company. I said, boss, come on, give me a break. He kept on saying this. Okay, I said, okay, if you give before the meeting, what happens after the meeting? What do they do with the agenda papers? So they said, we leave it on the table or they carry it. I said, I've seen papers on flights left behind. And some of the information can be very dirty. So some of the investigations is happening, again, a bank which has been involved. The information went on WhatsApp at 9:23. The official information came out at 4 o'clock in the evening, right? Well, I don't want to name the bank, this is public information again. So data information, the leakage around it. So the cyber, I don't know how the information went to thing. So now most of these paper information become paperless. So the directors, how vulnerable are they carrying all these papers with them, putting it on the board, circulating, but all of them carry the full file, etc., etc. Now I've been asking some of the board, why don't you convert it to paperless? They can see it on the palm top, put a screen before them, they can read it, etc. It's better that way. And there's a public-private network also, some of these questions. Now privacy standards, various regulations are coming to play. IP is a bigger issue, information protection. Laws, regulations, really I did a lot of research on some of these cyber regulations. We're not there yet. Not India, globally we're not there yet, because I've seen, we did the research of 7 big countries today, all the top 7 countries, here and there. But even the US, ASCPA just realized they should put some regulation, because boards are getting more and more nervous. More and more data is getting into the public domain, etc. Internet of Things, these are the latest technologies. How do you regulate some of these latest? We are talking about Bitcoin for some of the people. How do you regulate it? And then here is your brand. Cyber criminal enterprise go Web 3. And all this information one day can be put on the net. It's just waiting to happen. So one of them was the WannaCry, the ransomware attack. They're literally, I think that a lot of companies have paid money in Bitcoins to make sure the data is secure, but still they are not sure whether the data has been destroyed. Okay, every time they want to threaten, they will call up, put our money there, take it in Bitcoins and say, and that's the Web 3, we don't know where it is all going, but then we need to be careful about it. Certain things we need to take action about, and that's why some of these things about it. So why becoming common? Because some of the trends, if you see, the digital technologies is one of the things which is always happening. So all digitization is happening. So that's a common word today. Digitization end to end. You have so much mechanisms. First is accounts, then financial, then process, production, everything get in place. Second is innovation. So changes are happening like Bitcoins or AI or whatever, robotics. That is also coming to stay. Third is the credit card data. Very vulnerable place. It's a very unsafe world here, because credit card data, if I go into a shop down the road, I'm traveling now down south, I'm very nervous to give my credit card to that person. If you can go, they all take credit cards right across your toll booth. I don't know how secure is your toll booth. They come to your car, they can swipe it and give back a thing. But God only knows, because there's a lot of phishing. Phishing means the matter of seconds they can reproduce your card, keep it ready. Moment you go, they can use it, sell it, and that your money may be out of the system. So very nervous using a credit card in unauthorized places. And then the recent large operations, tighter security, because the data volume is huge. Because retailers collect data, they need research on data. They need Arjun's data, history, what he buys, what he's going to rebuy, what he's going to sell, what he's going to throw in 3 days, what is his family, what does his dog want. Every data is available for retail corporations, because that's the way they really attack, see how the trends are, put the stocking. So very important, those data are thing. Traditional controls, I won't believe it's going away, but there are challenges. Some of the traditional controls are here to stay, but then most controls are becoming more automation, more fuzzy about it and how to go about it. But now the most important topic, how do this board agendas going to change? Board agendas, standard controls, presentation, audit committees, reports, discussions, I think that will all go away. At some point of time, there'll be a lot of discussions on cybersecurity. Right now, if you say, I will say 15 minutes, right? Karthik, it was 15 minutes, right? One of those sessions, 1.5 hours, 15 minutes. But most of the time now, slowly it will evolve that a lot of discussions might happen around those areas. Because if you have one attack and it's proved it's a fraud or something, a lot of discussions come out on this hope. So how do you really mature? Not 100% secure always. You need to look at certain things, live with it. But certain times I said protect, prevent, and cure. That's the resilience, renovation, and then the prevention attack which happens. I'm just skipping some of these slides. I just go to some of the slides. How does monitor from day 1 to day 10, how the information gets leaked, how the CEO gets to know about it, and reputation always to know. But then it's not a matter of days now, it's a matter of minutes. Matter of minutes, you're there, you're taking action, then affected machines are crisscrossed. And if you see the ransomware attack, I don't know how many experienced this, because we had a whole organizations have reacted in various ways. Some of the organizations have gone back, switched off the machines. I know it happened on a Friday evening, right? Friday evening, they just switched off the machines. They said no access to anybody. I think they shut down for 2 or 3 days, cleaned up the machines, made sure all the next time Arjun logs in, change your password. Because passwords thing, and they did it quite often. In our office, we were shut down maybe 2-3 days. I don't know. I don't know. It took 2-3 days, but I think Friday went down. Saturday, Sunday was okay. Monday we were up. But the moment you signed on, change password. And we were given warning signals by SMS until Sunday. People don't react on Sundays and all, they've had it. Because Monday you log in, you just can't get in. All sorts of chaos are there, but then that's the way it is. So various certain companies couldn't even get up. Because I know various organizations between 15 to 30 days completely gone, lost money, reputation. But the whole problem is business is impacted, finance is impacted, and whole sets of chaos happen. So, and reputation, obviously, vendors you can't supply, cash payments are impacted. So the whole business community goes. So that's very, very critical, because cyber technology, everything runs on technology. If you miss something, you had it. You need to be very careful how do you really up the things and how ready you have to go up and down. Just as one of the 2 slides which I will close off, because leave Arjun to talk about some of these things. What is really corporate culture doing? So the tone at the top. Now, this can be education, this can be training, but some of these fundamental questions which are coming from the top management, whether it's a CFO level or a CEO level, or how do you really talk to directors on some of these funny things. Yes, that's why important tone at the top. So there's a lot of training now happening to some of the directors as well. So when all these internal controls came, there was a training. When the Companies Act came, there's training. Now cyber, there's a lot of importance being given by the board. So really, are we talking about backups, third-party backups, movement of tapes outside, building the culture of security in the company, etc. The tone at the top becomes very, very critical. Then incident reports. So policies, cyber policies. Interestingly, most companies don't have IT policies. People have seen IT policies detailed, half-baked. It varies. So it's all sorts of all over the place. So cyber security policy. Now IS policy, IT policy, and now you are talking about cyber security policy. I did this exercise in one of my clients. So we did a risk management exercise. Now risk management, if you see, it goes in various phases. One of them is to talk to the committees, then talk to key process owners, fundamentally assess the risk between financial risk, operation risk, traditional risk, all these various types, risk, merger risk, etc. Then you collate all the risks, because people, process owners, right from your finance function to your IT function to various people, and to CEOs you talk. And CEOs you talk about frauds, override controls, how is succession plan going, etc. So fundamentally, when you finish this exercise, and you see some of these meetings, single one-on-one meetings with senior people, and then you bring all of them into a room. So once you get them into a room, what happens is we start question. So I will say the sales guy feels the IT is the most stupidest thing in the world, because he would have told something, IT does not react. And you'll see the IT guy reacting, there'll be a fight. Okay, you'll see literally fighting happening. This all happens on closed door only, nothing for information, because very confidential information is shared. So one of these discussions, you will see each of these meetings, the IT guy used to poke. And not poke really, he'll really ask a lot of challenging questions. He'll say, this is the way it is, this is the way we can run. And fundamentally, when the risk register came, because each of the things we write all the risk register, name it, which had the maximum risk? Guess? The IT department. Because if you see, fundamentally, he was never asked in his life. Finance team gets every day audited. CEOs, poor guys, because of listing, they have a lot of governance norms. Sales guys, they are all under the pressure for various numbers, and their numbers get checked. But the IT guys, there are about 20, 22 risks which came up. And you come up with more than 5 to 6 risks, you're really getting to, and you're getting into 10 is middle, more than 15 is extremely worrying. So when you put up this risk register, I didn't do it in the public forum because this guy was very nervous. So I pulled him into a room with the CEO also and said, boss, this is what's happening. And one of the fundamental questions was, first question is, do you have a IS policy? He'll say, yeah, we had this. So do you have a IS policy? Then he finally, after 15 days of cajoling, he accepted, we don't have a IS policy. So I said, oh, what is the purpose? It's all documentation, we don't believe in it. I didn't ask something. I believe you had a license attack. So licensing is a big issue in most of the clients today, because they use unlicensed software, unlicensed unlicensed virus, antivirus, etc., etc. I said, you had a license raid, I believe, and you were forced to pay X number of rupees. He immediately shocked. How did you know about it? I said, boss, is a very small world, because I don't get to know. But there are vendors who call and tell me. So, okay, I might be right or wrong, but this is valid information. So immediately he realized that he was not going anywhere. He said, what do you want, Ravi? I said, simple. So we get into these issues of cyber crime, etc. The fundamental question cyber police ask, do you have an IS policy? The first question they ask, what is the IS policy? Are there procedures to back your IS policy? And one of the fundamentals is data protection, validity of thing, physical protection. All this will be part of your IS policy. So when you ask this question of cyber IS policy, he got really nervous. He says, okay, we'll write IS policy. He said, fine. We started comparing standards as ISO 27001, 14001, depending on the nature of the company. We started writing the standard. So it took us about 2-3 months. We wrote a policy. Then we came to the organization chart. It's very interesting because when you write a policy, it's not only the IS team which it touches each of the functions, each of the people, key people. It touches IT as well. So when we wrote all this, he was very happy because we are trying to touch every function in the company, including the CEO. The CEO has to bless it. The board has to bless the policy. He was very happy in the end. Ravi, none of this will work because I don't have designations here clearly defined. Even my team doesn't have designations. We do everything. When I have a problem to fix the wire, I'll fix the wire. When I have database, I'll go change the database. Some physical security rain happened 2 years ago. I'll go switch off the server and go home. I said, excellent idea. Switch off the server. Be happy at home. 5 days, no operation. Then you'll wonder what happens. So immediately I realized that after some exercise was done, even today, I know this has happened 6 months ago. When I went to a meeting with him 10 days ago, he was changing platforms from X platform, upgrading to some other platform. So I asked this question, what happened to my IS policy? He says, Ravi, what do you want? Say, I'm not asking about fees. There's some fees pending also. So I didn't ask about the fees X, but tell me what happened to the IS policy. So it's very difficult to implement. Ravi, you've given me one big policy. You're asking for organization structures. Nothing exists in my company. I said, talk to your CEO because this is going to be part of a risk procedure. So whenever these topics come up, this is not a topic for you or me. It's a board level topic. And this has to be adopted by the board because if there's a fraud incident or a cyber crime incident, some of the topics will be touched. And if you guys are not practicing some of this, you're very defensive in the defense lawyer case also, or offense, they can easily attack you. If you leave the door with the key open, somebody will definitely take it away. So this is what's going to happen to some of you. So some of these IS policies looks traditionally easy to do it, but not so easy. And how do we really follow? Then accountability of some of these things, again, I mentioned about one thing. And then the cyber due diligence. So how often do you do it? How often do audits happen? How often is it overseen by certain people? Very, very tricky things because third parties are involved. Then we are talking about source code reviews. I'll give you some examples of vulnerability attacks. Vulnerabilities, you can get into a system, attack the system with a tool, phishing attacks. Then you can get into application reviews, which is how the application written. So various things of cyber crime, cyber intelligence happening around the world. So certain things have to be done in a very procedural way. Certain things haphazard way. Certain things in a very, when an incident happens, you have to attack. Because certain incidents happen so suddenly, you don't know because the latest technology is there, they would have used it. So some of these filter risks, marketing reporting risks, how do you really schedule some of this becomes very critical. So I'll just close off the discussion with some of these topics. So some of these questions, the board, if you're sitting on this side or the other side, it's all the same. Does the board have this IT risk committee? Now IT risk committee is still not regulated, but I'm starting to see some of these boards now getting into this play. So IT risk committee is like a subcommittee of the audit committee. They'll report to the audit committee and some of these questions. Fundamentally, you'll be IT controls. You've done the latest automation. Have you done any new development? How do you really get into these? Certain things happen, some of these things. Secondly, the CISO report. Now, interestingly, CISO, Information Security Officer. So how do you really do an information security officer? Is he got independence? Does he report directly to the audit committee or subcommittee? Very important question because some of these functions roll up into the IT director itself. So conflict happens. So you need to be very careful how do you do it. Now incident response plan, existing incident response plan. Very, very critical because there are procedures which should be laid out for each of the incidents, whether it's a cyber attack or it's a phishing attack or whether it's a money threat or it's a disaster which happened, water attack, whatever, physical security. Each of this will have a different incidents. Incident response, very critical. So there's an escalation, goes to the next person. If he misses that escalation, finally whom it is reached. How does it react? Then finally, the 2 or 3 other things. Security begins with me, very important. Fundamentally, there are enough training programs, policy procedures around it. That's what I told about IS policy quite often. Now, important aspect, very difficult aspect is the requirement for vendors and suppliers, including cloud, hosting, SaaS providers. So there's always this busy topic on cloud, how often people are willing to change to cloud. Any questions on that? How many of us really will bet for a cloud environment versus a IT cloud is physical server, not here. Everything is hosted by a third party. Any questions on that? Will it be popular in 1 year time? How is it today? Situations? Any questions? Cloud is bound to be popular. Yeah. Sir, here any questions on cloud? Confidence quotient. This is a very tricky thing today. Today, at least the India environment I can talk, still very insecure. People are not very sure to go to cloud. But I believe in 2 years' time we'll all be there because there's no way we can maintain some of this hardware and software and support for some of these things. I've seen that even as recent as 2 weeks ago, some of the clients brought the physical server. I kept on telling them, don't do it. Difficult to maintain, security around it and all that. Now they have realized they can't maintain. They switch off the server every day and go. Just like defeating the whole thing, and next day they come and do it. But at some point in time, and the security around it, the vulnerability around it, so many things, and network security, so many things you need to take care of when you put a physical server. But some of these applications are all outside because hosted somewhere outside, so they also talk to each other, and there are vendors who have to access online, etc., and all this stuff. So some of these third-party vendors assessment intelligence around it. So regular reports, so incident reports, IT reports, security reports, vulnerability reports. So some of these reports which happen on a dashboard. Now every quarter now a lot of audit committees have had this checklist. Now regulators are slowly catching them. So banks have no choice, insurance companies have no choice, NBFCs have no choice, housing banks we have no choice. I think, I don't know, wherever ERMs have done risk management, top 100 capitalized companies, there's no choice. So that's where the regulation really will catch up hopefully in the next few months, hopefully not the years. Years is we are really doing a lot of catch up, but then when most GDPR, for example, any company sitting in Europe having a base in India, wherever data comes in from Europe and India, you need to protect. So data privacy around it will be very critical. So, and budgets, very tricky word. We've had this discussion several times. But then annual budgets are increasing. It's no longer a 0.5% or 1%. We are talking more 2%, 3% for top companies at least. I'm not talking about SMEs. But when I had this SME forum last time also, last week or 2 weeks ago, there were promoters who were saying, okay, let's talk about ERPs. Let's do it. It's not talk about ERPs. You have to invest some money to it. They have its own payback issues. So IT scenarios keep changing, but that's no way you can live away from it. It's not production alone, finance alone, but various other things. Outside world will push you to go into this digital world. Now, outside review of privacy programs, we are talking about board risk committees, how many of these programs are really. So every year there are companies who select certain areas, go after it. For example, vendor security. So so many vendors banks use. So how secure are the vendors? Literally how they're taking care of your data, how protection backup they're taking, how they take care of your physical documentation. So every year there are companies over a period of 3 years, they would have covered most of the IT policy security around it. Cyber insurance, again, it's come to play because scheme and insurance, cyber insurance is now coming into play because frauds are happening on cyber fraud. I think there's all cover policy available right now to go into some of this. So, and then the final question is risk tolerance. Now, once the risk tolerance can be very high, you can have risk appetite, but the reputation risk is too high. So nobody can really sit back and watch what the reputation risk is about, because the moment you're out, there's social media to catch up, and there you're out of the game. So it's very critical. The tolerance is actually zero tolerance right now, because if you have something, it's better to report it, get it corrected instead of hiding it somewhere, and then later on somebody comes up with some issue. So the risk tolerance also is going to be a very, very fundamental question. So some of these 10 or 12 questions which we keep asking, how is risk appetite, again application programs, etc. around it. So maybe I'll just pause for about a few minutes, 2 minutes before Arjun takes over some of this. Any questions as of now? Because I just pinpointedly asking some questions about how the board should view it, because the last few slides would have gone about what's the risk governance around it, IT governance around it. Even though regulatory, not there, but regulations are slowly catching up. If you want to refer some of the regulations, RBI has got something, IRDA has got some of the regulation, NBFC's got some. So people are starting to take it for other companies as well. And now, if Kotak committee report gets adopted, so you will have a lot of mandatory things coming into play for even for the listed companies as well. So any questions? Other matter. any specific things on the other. It's such a huge topic. Right. Privacy. See, there are various parties. You see the other information, once you do it, it gets into a third party. Okay, third party is protecting all your information. They have to take care of it. Unfortunately, it's in the database, common database, which is a government database. Now, a lot of things have happened. That's why the courts are all over the place saying that your data is not well protected. Now, some of this information are very classified information, because once you tap your Aadhaar, you can get the whole history of your thing. Now, I think there is a measure to protect it through some passwords. So that thing is not yet come out, because some of the cyber things around it is the database, how often can you access your database, whether you leave a log around it, whether it can be protected. That's why this December 31 again has got pushed to March 31, because if all bodies now link together with this common database, now all information around it will be unsecure. So that's why there's still around it. UIDI is working on it. That's the unique information database. That's where the unique information. The setup is still not there. Unfortunately, the regulation is still not there. So regulation becomes very critical, because if somebody steals your information, how fast you can charge it. Right now, it is a weak regulation. India privacy law is still not in place. Like your global GDPR is Data Privacy Act of the Europe is going to be very, very strict. If some information of that company is stolen, etc., it's a straight fine of X million dollars for that company. That CFO goes to jail and CEO goes to jail. Now that sort of regulation is happening June 18 when it comes into effect. That sort of regulation will India also copy. There is a privacy law which is starting to get implemented in India, it's still not there. Unless it is there and these bodies start effectively using it, because getting into court and fighting this out will never work. So that regulatory measure is still not there. Still your information is still a weak point, even today. That's my personal view. But officially, hopefully by March, they get all these regulations in place and get something out on that body. That will be very critical. Or else still it's a very, very weak wicket still right now. Because you can easily access all sorts of information out on the board. But there's no choice. Government is going one direction to even fundamental subsidy, transfers, everything, DBT, transfers are all based on Aadhaar. Which again is a very tricky thing. Some people, I was just in that place yesterday, a day before, I can't get net. I just can't get the net. So I don't know how much I struggle to get out to somewhere. So yeah, there are some practical issues around it. That's why the courts are also not much in favor of digitization unless you have the right infrastructure in place. And GST is another example. I don't want to mention about GST here. It can become very political, but GST is becoming a sad issue because of digitization, network, etc. Forget the GST and numbers and unregistered dealers, but basic net connectivity, etc. That's a basic challenge. And subsidy schemes, I believe from January 1, the fertilizer subsidy is not going to the company anymore. It is going to the fertilizer. If you buy it and you can show the invoice, only subsidy is going to be transferred. So complete change, rollover from a previous thing. It's already happened for the so fertilizer companies show an invoice, they could have got it. Now they're saying showing the invoice, and the third party, the farmer, should have picked up the challan, the item. They have to show the delivery challan, show as well as the invoice, or else the subsidy is not transferred. That's become very ridiculously hard for some of these fertilizers. We used to transfer the thing and then show the invoice and get the subsidy. Now no longer, they have to, and now connecting the farmer back into this, that's going to be the challenge. Because you can't get all the invoices, delivery, because there's so many distributors, dealers you have to connect, get the delivery challan. There's again a third party world to it, but then this. But some of the network connective issues, some of these digitized payments, direct bank transfers, etc., are all based on some of these fundamental issues. You can come here.
Just to add one point to it, the government of India, they don't recommend or they don't encourage storing the Aadhaar numbers. That's when the privacy comes into picture, and also the confidentiality required to be adhered by all the companies or any e-commerce companies for that matter. So they are very strict towards that, and as of now, they're not recommending to store any Aadhaar numbers of any individuals of the Indian residents. So that they just say that any Aadhaar verification required is required to be verified by the UDI. That's the point right now.
But the risk is always that your data is still unsecure because of weak regulation. That's for identification. That's why he said you should not store. Now regulatory, that's the problem. If regulation, yeah, they have, everybody has got your data. Extremely risky. No, they will go ahead, sir, because there are a lot of chance. Because most of them have come on board. But the challenge is regulation, privacy around it, and the infrastructure. GST big problem is the infrastructure. Everything is very good in measure and all that, but the infrastructure has to be really there. How to balance some of this data privacy, unless you strictly enforce a person not, and you see the credit card, whatever best there are people who will take it. So your information as good as public domain. You have to be safe. Hopefully people don't misuse it. But biometrics come or some photometric comes, that will be better. I think if they advance the technology slightly that way, I think your Aadhaar will be much better than your biometrics. So thank you very much. I'll leave Arjun for the next session. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Would you need a couple of minutes break or can continue? Great, thank you. Thank you, sir. And okay, before I start, how many of you are Charlie Chaplin fans over here? Let's make it more interactive. Charlie Chaplin, yeah? Okay, have any of you seen this movie called Great Dictator, where Charlie Chaplin mimics and makes a spoof of Adolf Hitler? This movie released in 1940. The immediate reaction from Nazi Germany was that they sent some spies out to the studio where Chaplin shot this movie, but they couldn't go beyond and make any greater destruction. All that they could do was ban the movie from being screened in any of the Nazi territories, which included at that point of time Germany, France, Austria, and a couple of other countries. Fast forward to 2014, Sony Pictures USA had released a movie named The Interview, where they had spoofed Kim Jong-un, whom you know is the North Korean dictator. Anybody knew what happened after that? No? It was in news big time. Just a week later, Sony Pictures USA was hacked by North Korea from a server in China, and the entire listing of unreleased movies has been taken away, and all confidential email communication of the company was leaked public. And the reputation damage that Sony Pictures had was humongous, huge, because there were a lot of personal communication between actors, their salaries being fixed, which was all leaked online to public. And that is the damage that you can create today with internet, with the amount of data that is available online. And well, talking about that, let me take you to one other quote, which is made by one of the ex-directors of CIA, the Central Intelligence Agency of USA. And you know that internet was before called as ARPANET, which was primarily used by the US military for their communication. So some decade after the ARPANET became internet and it was put to commercial use, George Tenet had reviewed the security features of the internet technology altogether, and this is what he had commented on. We are staking our future on a resource that we have not yet learned to protect, and the CIA still believes that it is true. Let us go deeper into our discussion today and see why it is so today. I'm not trying to threaten you, I'm just trying to create an awareness on how vulnerable we are by going digital, by becoming more computer savvy, I would say. How many of you use smartphones? Okay, good. How many of you know that you're actually using a computer, your handheld computer, which does a lot of other things than just making calls and sending SMSs, right? Okay. Okay, just to expand what we are in this room today. Today there are 3.74 billion internet users worldwide, 2.76 billion email users, and 225 billion emails per day. And today, if you are a somebody, it is certain that you are prone to an attack. And it is for you to decide whether you want to be a somebody or a nobody, but if you are a somebody, the scale varies on how quickly you get attacked, and at what speed you get attacked. Okay. This is the India story. Somebody just talked of questions over Aadhaar. The third bullet clearly says 120 million Aadhaar records was leaked by a telecom company, a recently launched telecom company, a free-for-all telecom company, I would say. Well, the Aadhaar data also got free for the cyber attackers. And what got lost with Aadhaar credentials was the phone numbers of all such people. And in most of the cases, your phone number is your identity. And if somebody can kind of snoop and get your phone data, create a duplicate SIM, your OTPs can also go to that particular phone number, right? And in India, we had somewhere close to 48,000 ransomware attacks. These are only reported numbers. In India, we don't have that much of reporting capability yet. Primary reason is that people, it takes a lot of time for people to realize that they have been attacked. Recently, Equifax in USA got attacked, but the data that was stolen was from 2013, and they realized that only in 2017. So 4 years of data has gone. So the speed at which you realize that your data has been hacked is also very, very important in today's world. Any questions till now before we go further deeper into the topic? Of course, you're basically using a computer. Smartphones. Smartphones, yes. It is. Very much, yes, yes. It's more than that. At the time of leak, they got to know that it was 120 million other records which got leaked. Okay, a quick question to all of you. Have you been, or do you know anybody who has been a victim of a cybercrime or who has been attacked? It could be your customers, it could be your clients, it could be your relatives, it could be you also. Okay. Yeah. So if you travel abroad and use your credit card abroad, you come back to India and try using the same card. Most of the typically with the foreign banks and some nationalized banks also, they block your credit card. This is primarily because there are certain countries, certain geographies where you go visit, use your card. It is 90% certain that the card would have been phished, or somebody would have snooped and taken the magnetic information. Even if it is chip information, there are technology available today that they can take out the information and then create a duplicate card or a fake card with the information that you share, right? Okay, so today, this session for the next 45 minutes, 1 hour, we will primarily focus on these three aspects around cyber frauds: data breaches, malware, and organized cybercrime. These are complementary to each other. These are not the only cyber frauds that happen, but what we have done is we have tried to group the most major cyber frauds within these three groupings. Okay, this is data breach. So we had a slide earlier when sir was presenting which talked that data was money. So today data is God. So your data, your company's data is what defines what your company is, and that amount of wealth of information also defines how you do business, how you transact, and how you interact with other people in the world, right? These are reported numbers again, 1,093 breaches in 2016. There was a clear 40% increase from what it was in 2015. And the amount of money that companies and organizations spend globally, this includes government organizations also, is closer to $73 billion. Have we completely protected loss of data? No, but we are not there yet. But the gravity of the issue grows day by day because primarily because of awareness issues, primarily because of weaker securities. Okay, a quick statistics on the different data breaches that has happened. Hacking, if you see, is one of the most vulnerable areas where data hack has happened. There are also other data breach methodologies like your web security, poor web security, fraud, social engineering, where somebody does a social engineering. They kind of call your number, get your OTP. So this primarily happens in tier 2 towns, rural areas in India, where people will call. People know that the user would have received an OTP, and with that OTP they can complete a transaction. So this very often happens in rural areas and tier 2 towns. Then there's seizure. Seizure is primarily something which is sponsored by the state. In a couple of years ago, when the Boston bombings had happened, the person or the alleged terrorist had an Apple iPhone which could not be unlocked by the FBI, who was investigating the case. And Apple did not provide permission, at least publicly. They did say that they will not provide permission to unlock the device, so that whatever information that the individual had shared with any of the alleged terrorist organizations could be pulled out. Apple went by the legal contract that this particular individual had signed with Apple when he purchased the device, and therefore it was not provided. But because of the larger public interest, the US government went ahead, reached out to a company in Israel, pulled out all the information, cracked the code from that particular device, and pulled out all the information, and then they proceeded with the case. So that's an example of seizure. The North Korean example, which I had told you about initially, is also a way of seizure. There are a lot of nuclear establishments which are always vulnerable for governmental attacks or defense attacks, which happen quite often. A couple of days ago, the DMK website or the Murasoli website of the DMK mouthpiece was hacked, and the case was filed with the cybercrime police. So this is something which happens quite often, and it's state sponsored sometimes. It is sometimes initiated by attackers who are again sponsored by the states. Okay, any questions on data breaches till now? Before we move on further onto what malware is, and then finally we'll have a detailed discussion on what organized cybercrime is all about. How this. Okay, so security at what level is very important. Security within the perimeters or within the environment of the bank is fair enough, not good or not great. Security that is within the control of consumers are not very secure because of the awareness or the level of awareness that the consumers have. Okay, so he gave you one example of any transaction or any login to your online user account, be it using your mobile app or using your web page, can only happen through multi-factor authentication, where your identification is authenticated twice. True. Okay, so in that case, you authorize a particular transaction, and if you don't get an OTP, in the case of US dollar payments, where you kind of transact, because the OTP is basically generated by a clearinghouse within this country, so therefore these transactions do not get tracked through the OTP model. What happens is, in case you get an SMS, in case you feel that this is not a transaction that you have initiated, you can immediately call the bank and the reversal will happen. Any foreign payments for that matter. That's same amount. That's not secure. OTP is more secure because in India you have many transactions happening in the local currency. The volume and the size of transactions are very huge. You go to a petrol bank, you wouldn't bother if you have done a 50 rupee transaction if that is coming in. Sometimes what happens is your SMS push message gets delayed. You get the SMS only next day after you transact. So you may not even know what transaction is that you have done. Somebody also will try doing a transaction for you from somewhere abroad in a local currency, which you may not know. So that is why they had kind of brought in the OTP or two-factor authentication. And in the case of international transaction, the moment you get a foreign currency SMS, that kind of immediately prompts you to see whether it is the transaction which you have done or somebody else has done. You get an SMS, right? Yes, you immediately get an SMS that it's a credit card payment. Mm-hmm. Hmm. 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 Okay, you're talking about an international card, right? Okay, that's where uh, so you're kind of equating this to a case where you have a mobile phone and you also have an international roaming which you activate only when you need it, right? No, I'm talking the same. You're equating it to the same case, right? I don't think the banks offer that because the moment they issue an international card, it is for use globally. What you can do is you can block it, right? Okay, so the moment you get an international card, the presumptive treatment is that. Mm-hmm. Okay, we'll see about that. We'll see about how that happens and why it happens in a while from now, in the organized cybercrime section. Mm-hmm. Okay, the one slide which we looked at is nope. This is India. This is India. Yeah. For example. Mhm. For example. Okay, so that is where the Aadhaar authentication will help. That is where the Aadhaar authentication will help, and uh, I'm not sure if you had registered your Aadhaar number with your mobile service company yet, but that is because you need to provide your biometric details. Only then it authenticates. Yes. So only if you provide your biometric detail, it's used for authentication and not for storing other information. So for the purpose of authentication, this security measure is brought in. You can do it because some again that depends on the device that you use. So certain devices do not capture biometric information. Certain devices which have been manufactured in the last 1 or 2 years, they do actually capture your biometric information also, with which you can do a registration. For example, today's Apple from iPhone 7 has a touch based authentication only. Okay. Computer malware, I think most of us know what a malware is today. Computer viruses, trojans, worms, any computer program that is used to attack, right? It could take any form, right? And these are the primary measures, or these are the primary means or methods using which today's attacks primarily happen. Your ransomware is one example. We had the WannaCry ransomware attack. We had the Petya ransomware attack recently. So these are one of the primary measures that is used to uh, steal or exfiltrate data from your device. And to move further, so McAfee has published something called as a malware zoo. So where they keep a track of every malware that is reported in the world, and you could just see the trend going up from 2015 to what it is now. So there are more than 600 million malwares that is available. One primary reason for the increasing trend is the use of mobile technology, because with mobile the access to computer system is much more frequent. The way we transact is much more bigger or much more larger in scale, and therefore that creates a bigger or a larger vulnerability. That doesn't mean that we shouldn't transact using mobile phones, but how vulnerable the device or how vulnerable the network environment is what matters. And Yeah, so this is very specific to mobiles. So of the 37 million malwares that have been detected, um, so there are somewhere close to 150 million apps, which carry these malwares. And there are a lot of apps. Most of you must be Android users, and I'm sure we give an accept all whenever we download a mobile app without even knowing or seeing what information that they would ask for. There could be some companies, like for example even Ola, it asks for your photo information. I don't know why they do ask for that, but they ask your photo app to be looked at. So there are a lot of these permissions that we give, and sometimes we are even forced to give because the app doesn't install unless you give this permission for them to install the app. So that is a key vulnerability. All these stakeholders, the regulatory bodies are discussing with the app development companies or companies like Google or Apple or Symbian or other OS development companies. The key challenge is that some of these operating systems are open source. So the key business model is running for them because they are open source, because they can bring in developers from any part of the world, and therefore it is quite open for the world to develop a particular software, and that is being used as a vulnerability, and that's where we have an issue today. Right, moving on. Okay, on the mobile malware. So sir, I'm coming back to you, sir. Again, you wanted a picture of where we stand in India, right? So we rank number 1 in the world in terms of mobile malware that we carry. So a lot of our mobile devices are attacked. The worst part is that most of us do not know that we are very vulnerable to attacks. Majority of them would be adware, where we will see ads flashing on whenever we use some of these open source mobile apps. Sometimes they could be a ransomware attack. Sometimes they could be some data exfiltration devices also, which is kind of penetrating through these mobile malwares. Any questions till now? Good question, sir. So I completely do not know the answer for that, because only after somebody steals your data and then they put it up to you, either through a ransomware or you get to know that your data is lost, because the modus operandi kind of varies every now and then. So somebody finds that, okay, they used a very sophisticated means to steal data from your device. The next time they use a very different methodology to do that. Yes, exactly. Exactly. Truecaller example. Very good example. Truecaller. Yes. Exactly. 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 And the person, the worst part is that let's say if I have your contact and I'm sharing this contact with Truecaller, you have not authorized for me to share that contact, right? Yes. So okay, I'll give you an example. Okay. Okay. Okay, there are two ways to put it. One is majority of the malwares are coming from China only. Okay, so that's pun intended. And the other reason is that China blocks a lot of these open source information for their own state security reasons. For example, China doesn't have a Google search engine. If many of you know, they use something called as Baidu, which is very protected. China still doesn't use Facebook, so they are more protective. And whereas a lot of these cyber attacks are penetrated from China. I told you about the North Korean example. The actual act was penetrated from China. When Sony Pictures was hacked, it was actually penetrated from China only. That doesn't mean that China is a state which sponsors very frequently these attacks. There are. Even the US does it. We'll get to see when we move further. Sometimes the US does it, and it kind of puts them in a trap also sometimes. So we will see how that works. most of the attacks today that India faces are coming in from China and from Pakistan.
Just to add to what Arjun said on the China, the reason why it is very low is because I would rather say that China has a kind of very strict regulation type of controls, which is required to be implemented across all the companies, and I would rather say that they take it up the controls that is required to be implemented, right? In case of any data privacy issue that happens, right? The government of China, the law as such, right, is quite strict and they're very serious about it, and any one single incident happens, the way they look into the issue and the controls is required to be implemented by each and every company, the awareness of that, the awareness of the viruses which Arjun talked about is very high. I would rather call it as compared to the other countries. I would not say other countries are not aware of it, even though they are aware of it. The action that is being taken, rather how seriously it is being acted upon by the companies across the other countries compared to China, China probably is much ahead of it. That's the one of the reasons, rather, I would say.
They're more restrictive society still. So they do have a lot of digital interface and transformation, but that is again very restricted to the geography. Okay, okay. So one big challenge that we have today is that there is limited international coordination. The reason why today's cyber attack is on the forefront of any company's agenda or any government's agenda, or for that matter any individual's agenda, is because the perpetrator is not necessarily within your geography. You will have jurisdiction issues, and the moment you find out, it is a humongous task for the countries to go behind these people who have launched these attacks and then bring them to justice. Yes, that's true. Yeah, which is true. So, but we are slowly moving into an international coordination mode. For example, the Indian government has something called a CERTIN, Computer Emergency Response Team, which kind of advises organizations, advises the citizens of the nation on any attacks that have come in, and immediately after an attack, they also advise the people as to how to secure themselves from further attacks. And this is a coordinated agency with similar such agencies across the globe from each of the country. But again, there is still a long way to go. The criminals are much faster than
The more and more we get into the secure measures, the more and more the vulnerability increased. So I would rather say it also increases proportionately to the more the controls we implement. So that's how it is. But I think the awareness is more required to be implemented and to be acted upon by every company, and not to take the controls very light. That okay, this is not there. Fine, we'll deal with it later, right? So one nature of our many of Indian companies is that as long as it does not have any financial impact, we are not that bothered, right? But we forget that the cumulative effect of that could probably lead to a greater problem in the future, which could probably hurt my complete operations, which we don't realize it unless we come to that point. I think that kind of awareness and seriousness is required to be implemented by each and every company and every individual rather. I think that's how we'll be able to compensate, or rather able to fight against these vulnerabilities.
But having said that, in most of the cases that were investigated later, in most of the cases, the primary issue was that certain fundamental controls were not put in place. For example, the Equifax data breach, which had happened from 2013, the primary issue was that the admin password was not changed for a long time, and it was a default password. It just said password. Okay, so there are certain fundamental. So you then open a gate, and the moment somebody is inside your environment, then that's it. So that's why for organizations, they will have to first understand what is the level of vulnerability that they have, how tech savvy or how computer pervasive they are, and then accordingly they will have to do periodic vulnerability assessments or your penetration testing. So what we call as ethical hacking. The companies can periodically engage ethical hackers to hack their environment, be it their applications, be it their network, and then frequently tell them on what bugs they have or what loopholes they have. In fact, Uber has done something like that. So what Uber has done recently was that some attacker had actually taken data out of Uber. So Uber had struck a deal with this attacker only. So where they will pay him some money to frequently attack them and tell them what their vulnerabilities are. So that is also a method by which organizations try to. Yes. So when states can do it, organizations will also do it. Yes, yes, yes. So okay. So the next 5 years, the prediction is that corporate espionage. What you're talking about is technically termed as corporate espionage. Corporate espionage will be one of the key threats that the industry would face in the next 5 years' time. Yes. The data is money. Data is God.
And so, just to answer your question, just to add to Arjun's point on that a global framework required. One challenge which many countries are facing, the global standard is facing, is that to accommodate each and every country's local the regulation is required. So if I have to bring in a global standard, and each and every country's local their own regulatory thing is should also required to be covered within that. So they are working towards it. Probably they'll take some time to how to see, it also addresses that every country is their own regulatory requirements. Over to you, Arjun.
Okay, so moving on, let's also quickly take stock on who these attackers are, or who these perpetrators are. So the Interpol has classified them into these 5 categories. One would be recreational attackers. These are basically college-going kids who are very enthused about hacking somebody else's computer system. They could be your friends also, who would simply want to play prank by hacking your device and say that, okay, yes, that I have done it. Sometimes they do it on a large scale to just prove their mettle. So they are one type. And others is a criminal one, but they act in isolation. They could be one or a group of 3 or 4 people who kind of do these attacks. Then the hacktivist, you have your William Assange, you have your Edward Snowden. The WikiLeaks is a classic example of your hacktivist case, where data is stolen for the purpose of some activism. There's also a very famous attacker called Anonymous, or an attack group called Anonymous, where they kind of go behind your ISIS, your Islamic State, and hack their websites, hack their servers and network to just make a protest. So hacktivist is one group. Organized group is the major threat that we all have today. We will go into it deeper because we are having a separate discussion on the organized crime. And then state sponsored. State sponsored is what every country is ready to, and then what they do. I'll give you a classic example. A couple of years ago, this happened in Syria. So Syria, is on one side, being Israel tries to attack Syria because Syria is also home, or Syria gives home to Hamas, which is one of the dreaded terrorist organization for Israel. And on the other side, Syria is also protected by Russia and China. So the radar systems that Syrian military uses to detect any aircraft intrusion into their airspace is actually defended by Russian systems. And these systems are very strong, that they detect any alien aircraft and then they automatically activate a missile out on that particular aircraft. And so US and Israel had to get into a bit of human anti-taking. So that's what they call in intelligence community. So human intelligence is what is called as human, and where they use local spies to get information on where these terrorists are housed, or where the Hamas headquarters is in Syria. And then technological intelligence is what they use to attack. So what they had basically done is they had created a computer program which will start activating the moment the flight, the bomber flight which carries the missile to attack the Hamas headquarters in Syria. Now what this computer program will do is it will go and attack that particular Syrian defense system provided by Russia. It will start creating false alerts. It will start creating false alerts such that the system will also detect Russian aircrafts or Syrian aircrafts as an alien aircraft. So the moment this happened, they had to shut down the system, and that's the time that they had used to go in and attack, and then they were back in just 5 minutes. So today warfare is played at this level. So it is not a conventional warfare that we do anyway. And this is one of the means through which the states are also trying to sponsor cybercrime or cyber warfare. So I just gave you an example. Any thoughts that you have on this, or any questions you have on this, on the attacker profiles? So again, these are the major attacker profiles or the groupings of attackers that we have today, who kind of perpetrate or penetrate into our devices or into our systems. Hmm. Hmm. Those are the standards, sir. But again, there are certain vulnerabilities with every device or with every network that is there. So the moment you start identifying and you start abusing that vulnerability, that's when the real issue commences. So so there are people who are paid to identify these vulnerabilities only, to try and do a scan of any computer environment, to try and do a scan of any network environment and see where the vulnerabilities are lying. It could be within your environment, or it could be in an environment which is completely alien to you, but where you touch upon, where you interface to interact with the bank, or you interface to interact with any other organization. Because today again everything is interconnected, right? So in one of the slides which Ravi had put across, so we saw something about third party risk, right? Where because today my environment, computer environment, is not just my own. I connect my computer environment with my suppliers. I connect my computer environment with my customers. You connect it with the government also for the purpose of GST. So now you need to have a uniform security across all of these connectivities. Now if that doesn't happen, and you are again still vulnerable. So the more complex it is, the more the hubs and spoke it has, and that's where the vulnerabilities come in. And there are people who are only paid to identify these vulnerabilities, and once they identify the vulnerabilities, the attack starts. Move on. Okay, this is one simple example of how an exfiltration is done. So somebody identifies what the target system is. Again, I told you, if you are a somebody, you're very well certain that you will be prone to an attack. They identify your endpoint, they take the data out, they put it to an aggregator. That aggregator will aggregate information from all other such targets which have been identified. Then they exfiltrate the information and put it on the internet cloud, which is again very secure and accessed only by those attackers who are a group of community, and then they take it to the dump service. Now these dump servers need not necessarily be in the geographical location where the data is stolen from. It could be anywhere in the world, right? And okay, quickly moving on to organized cybercrime. So when I started, I said data breach, malware, and organized cybercrime are somewhere complementary to each other. So organized cybercrime is like any other crime that happens, where you have a crime syndicate, where you have a mafia network. It could be a narcotics network, it could be a trafficking network. This is similar to that. So where you have different specializations, there is a dedicated organization structure with which these operate. The biggest challenge is that you have people in this organization, organized crime, who are from multiple nationalities. So that's where the attackers are way ahead of the law enforcement agencies. Law enforcement agencies are mostly restricted geographically, whereas the attackers are spread across the globe, and they are a group or they are a syndicate where they gather very quickly and then they dismantle again, right? These are some of the specializations. You could be a coder or a programmer, where your basic duty or basic job is to design or develop a malware. You design or develop a computer program to fetch data or to steal data. And then distributors or vendors, that is again a very key specialization, because you have taken the data now. What do you do with the data, right? So you need people who have the connect, who can distribute this information, because in most of the cases, let's say your credit card information is stolen, it would have been stolen somewhere from Eastern Europe, right? The data will be in Eastern Europe. So from Eastern Europe, it has to go to the place where that particular information is of interest in. Let's say information of all card holders from the United States of America is taken. So if it is stolen and if it is, like, say, given to somebody who would be interested in using that information for that particular geography, it has to be distributed there. So that's where the role of the distributor comes into place. And you have hackers. Hackers are not typically developers. They just deploy these programs in target points or target end systems. They are a mix of both, computer tech savvy guys, and also somebody, who would be your janitor also in your organization, in your company, who could be your even security, where they kind of plot these people to kind of infiltrate into the network, and then they, do the hacking attack. Then you have fraudsters, hosters. Hosters are basically, who kind of host the stolen information temporarily till the information is put to use. It could be any information. It could be your email account. It could be your bank account, which has got more value than your email account. If it is a Gmail account, I think today it goes for 50 cents or $1 per email account credential with the password. Whereas if it is your bank account, it could go anywhere up from $50 to $100 depending on your bank balance, right? And then you have money mules. Okay, the transaction is done. Somebody has taken data out. Of course, they take it for money, right? So what do they do with the credit card information that is stolen, or what do they do with the bank account information which is stolen? They pass it on to somebody else who will put that to use. And then for that particular transaction, you take consideration, and that is being taken care of by these money mules. Basically, they are couriers who kind of operate under the Hawala network, and then they transact money. And then there are tellers, and then there are leaders. Leaders are basically, you could kind of equate it to an executive management in corporate. These are basically mafia dons, if I would want to put it more colloquially, and who basically pump in the money to run this entire network, right? Okay, this is more interesting. There are cyber schools, there are courses which are available online, where you can specialize in one of the specializations we just looked at in the previous slide. This is very much true. This is easily accessible for anybody. There are courses on carding. When I'm saying carding, you have a magnetic strip information of your card, or you have the SIM, the chip information of a card. How do you create a duplicate card? So there are courses available online. There are certificates which are being issued. Why I'm saying there's a certificate which is being issued is because this is today an organized crime. So if you would want to seek an employment with any of these mafia networks, these certificates would help you, land a job. Okay, some of the sample course offerings: beginner cybercrime, payment card fraud, anonymity and security, how to erase digital footprints, becoming a mule herder. Mule herder basically couriers. How do I transact or deal with money in the Hawala network? So there are these sample course offerings today available online. Okay, and how is this organized criminal group being formed? Structured group, as I told you, 3 or more persons. They kind of exist for a period of time, because the more longer you operate, the more easy it becomes for the law enforcement agencies to detect you. So therefore what they do is, like, they typically exist for 3 or 4 large transactions. So when I'm saying large transactions, these guys are not interested in 1 card or 2 card items. Always whenever they attack and they tick, they kind of take data in millions of transactions. So that gives them more money in a single transaction. So they exist for 2 or 3 transactions, they dismantle again, regroup after some time. Right? They operate on a network style basis. Again, they are not restricted to one particular geography. They are multi-geography, because the transactions or the information passes across the globe. So therefore you need multi-geographical people. You need networks from different countries to operate this particular system. Mostly they are polycrime groups. When I'm saying polycrime groups, these are people not involved just in cyber attacks or just in any cyber threats. They primarily use cyber attacks to kind of supplement their other businesses, which could be narcotics, which could be trafficking, which could be money laundering also. Okay, this is another classic example. An Eastern European city in Romania. This place is commonly known as Hackerville. It's a city which is occupied predominantly by youngsters in the age group of 20 to 25, and most of the attackers are in that age group. Their primary job is to sit in an office, start hacking, start attacking, pull out information, exfiltrate, and then store it in the dump server. So the FBI had, after a long, the FBI, it's not just the Indian government, so even the US government has a lot of difficulties. So after a lot of hunting and searching over 3 years or 4 years time, they did catch hold of some of these people, and by the time they caught hold of the key perpetrators over the last 3-4 years, another group got formed in a different country, in a different city. So that's how fast the network operates. Any questions till now? Or is it a little over the head? Okay. And we just saw what the organization structure looks like. You have an executive management, you have recruiters, basically like how any terrorist organization works. You have people who are primarily deployed to identify these hackers and bring them into the fold, identify distributors and bring them into the fold, and once they are into the fold, they form a group, they form a structure, and then they start perpetrating attacks. And this is how the executive management works. They set up the business model infrastructure, they pump in all the money, they identify who the key targets should be, and what should be their turnaround, or what should be the quick turnaround time by when they will have to complete this operation and then go off ground. So that is primarily the role of the executive management. These are not the guys who will actually do the attacks. These are basically money spinners, and they basically the mafia dons who kind of operate this network. Middle management recruiters, who basically recruit, who bring in people, the hackers, the distributors, the money mules, all of them, they kind of organize the group. Okay, the bottom chain of command. And yeah, so this $5 million value that their annual earnings is actually a number which was put up by the FBI 3-4 years ago. Today the value is much higher. The bigger volume of transactions that you hit and pull out, the bigger money that you earn. Okay, this is the money mule or the courier, and how the Hawala network typically operates. Okay, some examples of organized cybercrime. We saw how the network operates and all of that. So how it is really put to use, and how are they very anonymous? How many of you have heard of this technology called Tor, or this software called Tor, the onion router? This also came in the paper recently. I think a month ago, the Hindu had published an article on Tor, but this was well in existence for the last 4 or 5 years. So we were talking about state-sponsored attacks, right? So the Tor was actually developed by the US Naval Defense Academy, primarily to be deployed for some of its intelligence agents who are working abroad to share information in a very concealed and secretive manner, so that the information cannot be decrypted and then pulled out by other parties. And they also used this particular technology and tool for the Arab Spring, which was very famous in Egypt, in Yemen, where there was an uprising against the government or the rulers at that point of time. And Egypt, Yemen, and some of the countries in the Middle East had a lot of restrictions, like how China had. So in such cases, if you use Tor, you can go access any website without anybody tracing you. And how that happens is this way. Okay, so you have a source, you have a destination, which could be a website or it could be a web server. You get camouflaged through a series of other computer nodes through which your information passes through, and therefore the source and the destination gets undisclosed. And this is a very foolproof method, again put out by the US Naval Defense, for the communication that they wanted to have with their own intelligence agents across the world. And they tried using it for their own covert operations in Egypt and Yemen to bring up an uprising, and somewhere that fell into the hands of the wrong set of people. And what has happened is this. How many of you have heard about Silk Road? Okay, very good. There's one. Okay, you've heard of Silk Road. Good. Okay, Silk Road is a website which is hosted on the dark web, what we call as the underground web market. This is like your Amazon. It's just an aggregator of all your suppliers and materials. But what you could buy here is anything that is not legal. You could get fake certificates. You could do contract killing also. You could purchase narcotics. It works even in India, and it is structured, or it is so very camouflaged that the source and the destination is not known. The government or anybody cannot trace who is transacting and what is being transacted. And somewhere through other mafia networks, other organized crime syndicates, the items that you purchase also reaches. There is a 70% success rate that the Indian intelligence officials have also vouched for. You order narcotics, you order any illegal substances through this particular Silk Road account, you get it. And the worst part is you can also give vendor feedbacks like you do in Amazon, and if you do not like a product, you can do a return also, right? Okay, so the US FBI did have they couldn't directly identify and pull out this particular group or this particular person who has launched this website, and this kept running. So they had to plot a spy. There was a covert operation again which was conducted. 2-3 years of tough job, and they kind of traced this guy somewhere in Norway, and then from Norway again back to San Francisco. The impact is that though it is in Norway or in San Francisco, the servers we found in Norway that run Silk Road. The impact is that though it is in Norway or San Francisco, the gravity of the issue is global. So you could buy narcotics, or you could buy fake university certificates, you could buy credit card information from anywhere in the world, and you could go untraced. And so this guy who was arrested is named Wilbur Ross Ulbricht, and he was again a Norwegian guy settled down in the US. He was running this. He was only 31 years old. At the time he was caught. But the most interesting part is after he was caught and the site was pulled down, 2 weeks later Silk Road 2 had come up. Nobody knows from where it had originated. So that's where we are today. Any questions till now? But don't try accessing Silk Road from your normal computer, this ones, unless you have Tor on your systems, because you get immediately tracked and traced. Okay. So if you look at what the organized cybercrime syndicate typically targets, the primary information that they are looking at is carding and card related information. The moment they have this information, they kind of steal whatever money that you have. Typically they are more interested in debit cards than credit cards, because in the case of debit cards, the money is real, and then there's no much of reversal that will happen because the money gone is gone, right? So any questions on this slide? No, it's easy to do a reversal. It's easy to do a reversal. In the case of a debit card, the problem is it all depends on the insurance limit that the bank has in such cases of vulnerabilities. Okay, it again depends on, they again go in investigating into it. If there is a failure in the bank's own system because of which the leakage has happened, then the banks will definitely not say no. Whereas in most of the cases what happens is these information are taken from most of the point of sale systems, your POS systems. It could be your supermarkets, it could be your toll booths, wherever you swipe the card information, and that's where the boundaries are defined. So if it is anywhere from outside of the bank's environment that the data is taken, then the banks will not be able to help much on it. Okay, so that is why RBI is always, quite skeptical about it, and they have not given any approval for any amount holding greater than 10,000 rupees in payment wallets. They have now increased to 50,000. So the reason why they were very skeptical about is because of this only. One is the actual security that somebody is going to build. Companies which offer payment security there is an RBI guideline, RBI cybersecurity framework, which is very, very specific to this payment wallet, or what they call as prepaid card information. But it also has a lot of dependency on the people who use it. So if you don't do a secure transaction, then it's quite difficult to secure the amount. So that's why they're very, very skeptical, and they kind of limit the payment wallet amount. There's a cap on it. Act. That's fraud. That's fraud. So the thing is, like, before any new technology comes in, so the government is also trying to be very tech savvy, but the problem is the moment any new technology comes in, you need to look at a lot of other factors. You need to look at money laundering issues. You need to look at, the first thing that anybody would think of is, like, what if the particular individual's money is stolen or taken away? And then the next would be money laundering. Money laundering is another bigger issue. Terrorist financing, another bigger issue, which you cannot control much if it is through, because you kind of do more of a crowdsourcing kind of a setup, right? Because the money is more distributed now. And with new technology like blockchain, again, that's a bigger issue. So if we talked about Silk Road, right? So most of the transactions are through bitcoins. So if you see, the denominations are all on bitcoins. So if you hold a good amount of bitcoin amount, then the tracing is even more difficult to do. Yeah. Yes. So once you get a bitcoin, so that becomes a legal transaction, right? No, that becomes a legal transaction. The first time you buy a bitcoin, that's a legal transaction, and later what you do with that bitcoin is very difficult, because the thing is, like, in bitcoin, your bitcoin will have an address for you. Let's say how you have a bank account, but it is completely it's not very easy to decipher that particular account detail.
Just to add to that, right? For the bitcoins, earlier there was no bank account is required. I mean, I can just probably from any bank, I can probably transfer the amount to my Bitcoin page, and through that I can probably purchase a Bitcoin. So there was no accountability, or there was no tracing of where the money comes from to purchase a Bitcoin. Now what happened recently is that I have to register a bank account within my profile in my Bitcoin, any vendor be it, and I have to transfer only from that particular bank account. And thereby now the government, or any regulatory for that matter, in fact, now they'll be able to trace from which bank account, who holds it, and where the how much of money has come from, and they're trying to track the amount that is getting into the Bitcoin, the whole pool of it.
Yeah, point of origin alone can be traced.
Can be traced.
But further you do any transactions with Bitcoin, that's quite difficult. But
that's quite difficult, yeah.
If you talk about ZepPay, yes, you can do it. ZepPay, that's a legalized way of doing it. But if you do it through Silk Road, it's very difficult to do. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. It has an address. It has the origin. It has the source information from which computer system this Bitcoin has been transferred. But it's very, very difficult to decipher. It's a huge algorithm. Yes. So that's why a lot of companies are a lot of countries are facing difficulties with it. So there are multiple ways in which you can earn money, in which you can transact, you can do money laundering. There are gaming portals. There's a famous one called Warcraft. So you kind of choose which you don't play the game. You hire somebody from, let's say, Bangkok. Bangkok is very famous for that. The same way you saw about Hacker Wheel, where young individuals create programs, they do the hacking. So in Bangkok, there are a a large set of younger population who are into gaming. They play the games for you, and the more levels you cross, the more amount of bitcoins you win, which can be again traded for multiple other illegal activities. Yes, yes, yes. So totally, so the when one is Warcraft. Then similar to earlier 4 or 5 years ago, there was a game called Farmville, which was legal in Facebook. It used to be very famous, Farmville, where you kind of buy a piece of land, you grow it. So similar to that, there is a dark web version of that, where you buy your own land, you buy your own, you build your own city and all of that. It's more like your monopoly trade, and you increase the inflation rates, and therefore you get more bitcoins. And so
The only thing where the Bitcoin is being still encouraged is that where the countries where they want to they against the U.S. dollar, like Russia. Earlier they wanted to bring Japan in as the global currency. It didn't work out. Now Russia said that we will go with the Bitcoin currency, cryptocurrency, because they are against the U.S. dollar, and that's the whole is even more encouraged. But Indian government also said that there's nothing wrong in probably in the cryptocurrency, but then it's not legalized, and all the companies. I mean, there are many companies who are trying to invest in that. All the illegal money, trying to get a lot of profit, and thereby recently there are top 10 has been identified, and the income tax rate has also happened. So it has not been legalized, and they're against all people who are trying to invest in Bitcoin. But there are some companies, some bodies which are against the US dollar, the global currency dollar, where they're trying to encourage this cryptocurrency, thereby, they can pull the US down, and then they can probably get into cryptocurrency. And that's some of the motive also going behind, and God only knows what's going to be the future of it. But yeah,
okay,
that's risk is
okay.
always there.
Just to add on, um, the reason why countries are not legalizing it is because bitcoins cannot be regulated. So it operates on a technology called as blockchain, where the ledgers are distributed. So so there is no clearinghouse, there is no central bank, so there is no regulator concept at all. So it is distributed. Each of us will have an accounts ledger, and it keeps updating. So the last transaction plus all other transactions. The only challenge with Bitcoin is that you need good amount of processing speed and storage space in your computer device. You have these two, and it works on a technology called as mining. There are dedicated systems which will mine information, and then add new bitcoins to the system, and that is how the sudden speculation of more value being attached to the bitcoin is also coming up. But for this, whether it could be regulated, no, it cannot be regulated because of the technology that it is developed on. Once you have a good set of participation across the globe, then the system will itself regulate it, because it's a distributed ledger. No. Okay, see yeah, the reason they would want to illegalize it, because it is very difficult to identify your transactions. Yes, yeah, typically profits, and what you so today again we are if you honestly ask me, we are going back to a world where we were earlier doing barter system of trading, right? So we are somewhere going there, and I think this is all a precursor to that, I would say. So again, from a cyber security point of view, newer technologies also pose bigger threats, because the level of understanding that people have, that organizations have on these new technologies coming in, and the speed at which people are adopting it is also a major challenge today. Okay, we looked at this. Okay, these are the other examples: payroll fraud, corporate account takeover. Corporate account takeover is typical, corporate fraud from a cyber threat perspective that will happen. Many organizations, even in India, even in Tamil Nadu, Chennai, Coimbatore, Salem, a lot of companies. So today we all transact online, right? We all do NEFT or RTGS transfers when we are making vendor payments, right? So suddenly, so that's basically because you have the vendor's bank account number stored in your vendor master. Now, if there is a change request for the vendor bank account, sometimes what happens is we think that it is from a legitimate source that we have received the request and we change the bank account number, but it would have been a fraudulent person or somebody who has impersonated as a vendor, and typically this happens where you have foreign vendors. Yes, yes. From companies which are just 3 crores, 4 crores turnover to the largest ones, they all have this issue. Again, it's operating based on a crime syndicate network where they identify what a company. Okay, so honestly, I have seen 4 to 5 cases with some of our clients. There was no recovery, sir. Okay. Hmm. 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 Correct. So man in the middle attack. Hmm. 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 Okay. Hmm. Okay. Hmm. 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 Okay, that's a nice way to deal with it. Hmm. Okay, good. So in the cases that we had looked at, it was the transactions were international, and 3 in Bangkok, 1 in Malaysia. So money did not come back. Yes, yes, 1 in Malaysia and money did not come back. So that's an issue. So there are different ways in which it happens. So there is a classic case. I wouldn't want to reveal which company it is. So there is a classic case on this money transfer which has happened. So this is a credit agency, a lending company, where sometimes what happens is customers pay in excess. So when the last installment is completed, they see that there is an excess, and every month they identify what are the list of excess items that are there, and they pay it back to the customer. And what has happened was, one particular customer had suddenly come back saying, because it will be smaller amounts, it will be amounts in the range of 4,000 rupees or 5,000 rupees. So big organizations wouldn't trace this much of amount whether it has come back or not. So luckily one organization had identified that they had to receive some excess money, but they did not come. So that particular incident triggered an investigation, and finally it was found out that the person who was authorizing, he was the second authorizer, so had run into a scheme where using his acquaintance, who was his counterpart or who was his spouse, I would say. So this is a lady. She was a college professor, very much in Chennai, and the different bank accounts that was used were all the accounts of the students to transfer this one. So it was not just one account. So it was very difficult to trace back and then put it back to one person. So that entire chain of investigation took somewhere close to 6 or 7 months. No, it's not a lending bank. It's an NBFC. NBFC, yes. Well, but then it could happen to anybody. But you have such schemesters operating at all levels. This was a very unique way of defrauding, and politically connect. Sorry. Yeah, rounding off this one. Yeah, correct. Hmm. Totaling error, rounding off, yes. But this one was a deliberate fraud, and the amount involved was somewhere about 4 crores or 5 crores in a span of 6 months. Because what we are talking about is 4,000 or 5,000 for one particular customer, and they have a huge customer base, and so that's experience. So what happens is sometimes the customers may pre-close. Sometimes they could opt for a change in the loan structure. These are commercial loans, so they could opt for a change in loan structure. So eventually, when they close the loan book, only they get to know that whether there's any excess or not. So at that point of time, if it's in the value of 2,000, 3,000, 4,000, 5,000, it doesn't matter when the amount of borrowing is in the range of millions. So somebody had actually understood this particular item. They schemed it in such a way that it goes untraced. So that's where it's not just the technology element which is involved with it. It is also the the human element. The only challenge was that such repayments, the bank accounts, were actually tabbed in an Excel and then uploaded. So the person who had to authorize second, he was the fraudster. He kind of changed those bank accounts and then he uploaded. And again, this person was so smart enough that he did not give one bank account, and he did not give any account which is related to him. It was all different bank accounts, and the way they operated was very, very unique. The students, typically not all of them did return the money, because they were all getting not the same bunch of students will get every 2 months or 3 months. Some they could get. Some students had even passed out and left also. Yes, because the money was actually recovered from these two key people. Yes, yes, yes. But yeah, off the record, they were also politically connected. So it did take some additional time also to trace back and then get them to get the money back. No. What published? Okay, I didn't know that. Because there was a lot of thing that the company, the victim company, did not want it to be blown out, and because there was also political angle to it, so they did not want this to come out. But what I gave you is one small example. There are more such cases which happen. The only issue is that we get to know this, or the companies get to know this not immediately. Let's say this scheme would have happened over a period of time, and then suddenly some anonymous letter or some customer coming back saying, okay, I did not receive this money, what happened? And exactly. But if you nail it down, it was that fundamental issue of having your bank account numbers in an Excel spreadsheet and uploading it to your bank account. That was the fundamental issue. If that was all interfaced directly from your ERP, this wouldn't have even happened. Yeah, that's payroll is a challenge. Yes. Okay, this is just to see how criminality is in today's world. So, okay, what is the way forward for us? Today you cannot dispense away computers. That doesn't mean that because these attacks are happening, these issues are coming out, you cannot chuck away your electronic transactions or electronic communication. It helps us. We have already adopted it, so it is very difficult to go back now. The best way is to create awareness. Know what my fundamental security measures should be in terms of password security, in terms of multi-factor authentication, in terms of what I need to first understand what private information is as an individual, as a citizen, and the same thing applies to an organization also. What information is confidential, what information is private, and only then a larger impact can happen. Unless this awareness is not there, that is something which is very difficult to achieve. And then law enforcement, again, you have jurisdiction issues today. It is global scale. You don't restrict anything with just one particular this one. We had a similar case also. You had this Suchi Leaks event which had happened. So though it is of an individual, it's more like your ransomware kind of an attack only. Somebody had stolen the data from somewhere in Eastern Europe, and then the account was hacked and then leaked out. And yeah, increased prevention strategies. We saw a case where globally the actual spend is $73 billion, which will actually double in the next couple of years with new technologies coming in, like blockchain, like Internet of Things. Internet of Things is again, though it is very good, artificial intelligence is very convenient, it's very, very risky. I'm not sure if many of you have started using Amazon Alexa or Google Home at your place. There's no hack which is reported, but the amount of data that it collects is quite humongous and huge. So by, let's say, Yeah, so after 6 months of time, you kind of use the device more frequently, so it becomes your own family member. So it knows what your preferences are. It knows what your these are. Yes, exactly. Exactly. So that's big data that they talk about. Right, right. And they I'm not sure if you have heard of the Google's revenue model. So let's say you make a digital footprint. Let's say you do a ticket search um, um, tomorrow or the same evening or today this afternoon. You go back. Yes, you get a suggestion immediately. You get a suggestion from any of the travel websites. Um, exactly, exactly. Because Google typically earns their revenue from this means only, from these ways of targeted ads. So targeted ads are basically auctioned somewhere in Germany or in Austria, where Google has its office. Because of tax purposes, they have put their offices in that place. Somebody auction, the auction just happens in 10 seconds. It flashes to your travel agents, and they would want to see identify you as a target based on your age profile, based on your travel destination, based on the date on which you would want to travel, and what are the hotel options that you're looking for. And just 10 seconds is all it takes, and then the advertisement will flash for you. And so the moment you log into your system, you leave a digital footprint over there, and more so when you're connected to the internet. Okay, any questions till now? Right, right. Oh, okay. So that was primarily, a partnership or a tie-up that was brought in by this Google and Facebook. They kind of tried using it to their advantage by getting a convenience for you to save on your registration time. Exactly, that is one. And Google will also start understanding your, reading profile. What is it that you are interested in? Not sure how many of you have used Google Trends. Okay, Google Trends, try searching Google Trends, try looking at Google Trends. You ask for anything. So, for example, you ask how many times a person has searched for buying a pair of shoes. It will give you a global trend. So anything that you do in the on the internet that gets tracked, and you get interesting information out of it. And that's where you see where people a lot of you can actually uh, get to know the true identity of people. Though Google Trends doesn't disclose which particular individual has looked for it or what are the group of people, but they give a broader idea. Yes, geographically, age group wise, they give that. Google Trends is something which you can look at and see how beautifully today things are arranged. But again, everything is tracked. Everything is, you leave a footprint wherever you go. Europe had a very difficult legislation or very difficult, law case with Google, because some citizen from Europe had deleted history. But they somewhere found out that history did not get deleted from the database of Google. But again, that's a system limitation. You cannot do it. Once data is archived, you cannot again go back, find where the data is. Correct, correct. Exactly, exactly. So Google also said to the court in Amsterdam, this case that happened in Amsterdam, and they said there's nothing much that they can do, because once the data is backed up and archived somewhere or taken out in tapes, it is very difficult for Google to, it's a costly affair also to find out which information, it is that for which history is deleted and then pull it out. Okay, it's today it is different. So you decide what should be private. Everything is public today. You decide what should be private. If you think some your photo app on your mobile should not be public, you kind of restrict any app which will ask for access to your photo database. So you decide. Everything is public otherwise today. So it's the reverse around today. Right. Yeah, there are companies which recruit employees today based on their LinkedIn profiles, based on their LinkedIn testimonials and feedback. So that is quite happening quite often. There are companies which internally use social engineering or social media. So they don't use Facebook, but they use something called as Yammer, which is very restricted for that particular company, so that there's more connectivity within the organization. So there are organizations or there are companies which try and do that. Again, you cannot come out of it. Today we are more digital, so it's how judiciously we use it is what will define. But it is no more a possibility. It is a certainty that attack will happen. It depends on whether you are a somebody and whether you hold critical information and how quickly that becomes available or that becomes known by people who are trying to target you. Yes, yes, that's right. And in the US today, there is a new service which is coming. So where you sign up with a particular company, and they will tell you who has looked at your data, who has accessed your data, and if your data is stolen, whether it is actually really stolen. It's been provided as a service by one of the technology companies in the US. You just need to sign up for a membership contract with them, and you need to pay some $100-200 every 6 months, and then they tell you. If you're really interested in where your data is going or who is looking at your data and what amount of data loss has happened, yes, that's a good service. But this is something which they don't offer to any company or an organization, something they offer to individuals. Right? Any further questions before we wrap up? And I hand it over to Karthik for the IT audit piece and the regulatory framework. Great. Thank you very much. And any questions again, I'm here only, I can answer you. Thank you very much. Thanks a lot.
Okay, so this is on the IT audit. So how many of you are aware of the IT audit? What do you mean by IT audit? IT, the word IT is information technology is very vast, right? It's very broad. So what do you mean by information technology? Any company, many auditors come and say, I'm doing an IT audit, right? So the scope of why do we do IT audit? Why is it required? That becomes the first point, a focal point for us to understand, why do we have to do this, right? So Arjun spoke about a lot of this, the frauds and the vulnerabilities that exist in the world, right? So how do we as a company we protect that? So as a company, how do I ensure that I am secure? So there was one meeting, where we were presenting in the audit committee. So one of the board of the directors question was, are we secured enough? Tomorrow some because all my data is in the cloud. Tomorrow some hackers, they come and steal the data. How do I respond to the public or to the investors? So one of the CEO responded to that, saying that I can do as a company what I can do. The vulnerabilities always it exist. The hackers can do whatever they want. But as a company, I will ensure I put in the right control to prevent the data to be protected. And if something goes beyond that, and somebody's going to question me that somehow they're going to be a legal case on the company, I will say this is all the things I've done it. So beyond this, the data has been, hacked. So which probably, I can take the responsibility of it. But as a company, I've ensured I have implemented the controls required to protect the customer data, right? That is where the objective is, that we as a company, we will try and ensure to implement the adequate controls is required, so that we have been protected by all these virus and the trojans and all the hacking, etc., that's happening across the world, right? So in that point of view, we as a company will decide where is the risk is coming from, right? And what is to be implemented to in order to ensure that the data, the customer data, be it, or the personal information, be it, of the customers, etc., or the employees, be it, are being adequately secure, right? So from that point of view, we'll probably go on the slides. We'll understand, what are the major controls is required, and also we'll understand that, you know, how it has been derived from. So this is an audit approach diagram, which has been generally, you know, the audit approach to the stat auditors, right? So while the stat auditors come and do an audit, right, on any ERP, from where they rely on any information from the ERP, or rather, you know, they rely on any data from the database. For example, the ledgers that comes from the system or from the database, right? Any fixed asset register be it, or any known register be it. So for them, they would want to get to ensure that data what they are relying upon is adequate and it's complete, right? And how do they ensure that data what it is coming out of the system is accurate enough? So as an stat or as a financial auditor, I don't know what are the logic that has been built in the ERP, right? So they rather, you know, they're also not aware of, you know, who can probably edit or modify the transactions once it is being passed, right? So that is where, you know, they wanted to do an audit on the ERP and the database to ensure whatever information that is coming out of the system is accurate and is complete. And the integrity, when I say integrity, you know, what is to be the value in the ledger is exactly the value, you know, what is being transaction has been performed and has not been modified post the transaction, right? So that is exactly, you know, what they also want to have an comfort on. And that is where the IT audit, you know, it got evolved. So therein the control started implementing on the ERP and the database where the data has been stored, to ensure that, you know, nobody is able to modify the data, you know, post the transaction has happened, right? So these are the phases of the IT audit. One is on the planning phase, testing phase, and concluding the reporting phase. So first is on the planning phase, you know, probably I'll let you know how the planning phase happens. So when an auditor comes in, they come and understand the various business process. They identify the risk, right? The risk of the material misstatement. They identify, you know, what are the areas is required to be audited, and then they understand how the information is being flown from the origination until the information is being, you know, posted. So within that flow, they understand, you know, all the ERPs or what are the systems through which this transaction is being, you know, probably posted. So they identify those systems, and then they want to ensure that while the transaction is being posted through this transaction, it goes to the another application. From there, it goes and sits on the database. They want to ensure that the data, what is being, you know, probably originated, is exactly has been, you know, posted in the database. So once it's got posted, it has not been modified by any other user who has access. That is called unauthorized access. So once a transaction that has been posted, if some X or Y wants to probably modify it, there is required to have an adequate approval to it, right? That is called, you know, the authorized modification. Else it leads to the unauthorized modification of that. So that comes under, you know, so such planning happens in the planning phase. And in the testing phase, once I identify what is the ERP, then I go back and do an IT audit on that, and then I evaluate them, and then I conclude them. Now on the audit phase, so first is on the risk identified from the area. So the financial auditors will identify what are the areas is required to be audited, and they also identify the ERP or the system which is being through which the transactions are being posted. So once they identify that, then IT controls is required to be tested on those ERP, which is like user access management, you know, to ensure that, you know, only the authorized users can modify the data. Second is the change management, to ensure that, you know, the logic built, for example, the depreciation logic, or, you know, the any other computation has been built on the ERP, for example, interest computation, right, which is built on which is coded in the ERP, is appropriate and it's in line with, you know, the what is the company's objective. So we go back and ensure that no one has modified those logic, and the data has been backed up adequately, so that something goes wrong with the ERP or database, the data is available for the users to probably go through it. And then, you know, we identify the key controls. What are the key controls? Again, the user access management, change management, the data backup, etc. We identify those key controls, and then we do an audit, and through that we give a assurance to the financial auditors that whatever data you are relying from the database or from the application is appropriate and is accurate and it's also complete. So identification of the IT risk. For example, what are the procedure by which transactions are initiated, authorized, and recorded, processed, and corrected? And then we also say that whether data transfer from one application to the other applications, right? So for example, there are companies where in the branches, they perform a transaction. They record the collections, and after end of the day, it gets posted to the application in the headquarters, right? So that's the interface. So data from one application to the another application, it moves automatically without any manual interference. That's second point. And then we talk on the database and network operations, where we talk on the bad jobs, we talk on the backup controls. Bad jobs is nothing but when the data is being transferred from one ERP, one application to the another application without any manual interference at one specific point. Let's say at midnight at 12 o'clock, all the transactions posted in a particular day gets posted in the end of the day. That's called bad job. At all the the transaction gets posted through a specific job that is being created by the respective developers. And then the physical access, where the data is getting stored in the server. How do we ensure the data is being protected and it's not been theft, or it has not been taken away? And then access security, as I told you that how do we ensure that only the authorized users have probably performed the transactions. For example, I am as an finance person, I will have a user ID login, like for example Karthik, and I don't have a, so only Karthik user ID will be able to authorize a specific transaction. But in case if I have a generic ID called the finance department, so anybody can use that user ID, right? That becomes more riskier, that we don't know who has logged into it and who has approved the specific transaction. So the authorization of each and every transaction is very critical, and that is why we have the access security to ensure that all the user IDs are very unique. And second thing is that the user ID, the privilege is being assigned to user ID. For example, I create a specific transaction, I post a transaction. So I cannot create and I cannot post a transaction. So there should be a segregation of the access rights given to a specific user ID. That is more and more important, which will probably avoid many such intentional frauds that happens in many organizations. And third one on system change control. As I briefed you earlier, there are many logics are inbuilt within an ERP. For example, interest computation, depreciation, and many other the evaluation of the pricing. All that has been inbuilt, coded in an ERP. Now, any changes to this particular code will probably have a greater impact on the transaction that gets recorded in my database. So any changes to such the logic or any to the ERP is required to be reviewed and authorized by the respective the business heads, right? So they are the owners of the respective module. So they need to review and they need to approve. Yes, this particular change can probably go to my ERP. Thereby, it does not have any impact on my financials. That comes on the change control. And so these are the key controls that is required to be audited, which exactly on the fourth box. So one on the bad job, network operations, access security, and change control. And so all these risks that is been linked to the financial audit. So when a financial audit has been performed, and all these IT risks will be linked to the respective assertion level on the financial audit. And so based on this, the financial auditors will take a call whether they can rely on the report or the information coming from the ERP, or whether some substantive or additional procedure is required for them to rely upon the report that is coming out from the system or the database. So this IT risk gives them the comfort that the data, how much the financial auditors can rely upon, that is being taken out of database and the ERP system. And that also gives a comfort to the companies and the management that where they can also have a greater view that how secured is my organization once a transaction has been performed. Is there any intentional fraud that can probably happen because of the weakness or lack of these controls being implemented. And the third one on the internet security, network security, and database security. So this is also plays a vital role when you have any web-based application. So many companies, they have a web-based application where all these cloud-based ERPs are a web-based application. It can be logged in from anywhere from the internet. Such applications are prone to various attacks, which Arjun talked about, a few minutes back, where we need to ensure that the web-based application is protected, from those viruses and those vulnerabilities, and thereby we also ensure that from the internal control point of view, that there are controls being built on such internet-based applications, thereby it has been secured enough, and hackers do not probably try to hack the application and get it into the system and then probably play with the numbers, right? So that also is required to be ensured from cyber security as well. So if a system is not a web-based application, then I don't need to take this risk into the consideration. But if the ERP is a web-based application, then I need to probably consider this risk as well for my evaluation point. And just a sample objective on the data center to determine if my data is being appropriately backed up on a periodic basis so that it can be carefully and completely recovered. So something goes wrong in my organization where I have a fire incident. My database, is been caught up with a fire accident, right? Now I don't have a data where I will not have a data to see what are the transactions performed in the previous 6 months or 1 year. So what do I do with? So these are the type of controls required to be built in to address the risk. So something goes wrong in my organization, how do I recover my data? The one is on the business continuity and a problem or a incident management, which will, like, some incident happens, is there a team who can probably provide a resolution to it? And backup control, where on every day whatever transaction have happened, I take a backup of that. And then the disaster recovery, something goes wrong, do we have a disaster recovery team who will probably work on that disaster immediately to recover the data? And the bad job controls, as I talked about, the interface control between one ERP to another ERP, and physical and the data center access controls. Third one is on the user ID, unauthorized access, unauthorized modifications to the financial data. As I talked upon earlier, there are controls like all the user ID have to be uniquely identifiable. We don't have the generic IDs are completely not encouraging. We don't recommend to have a generic ID like finance HR department or the marketing department, etc., because that will lead to we will not be able to identify the accountability of those user IDs, right? And hence we always recommend the organizations to have a unique IDs. And second is is there a proper control to ensure how the user IDs are being created in the system, how the user IDs are probably the access to the user ID are being assigned to system. That's very, very vital, because adding, if I have an access to add some rights to my user ID, I'll keep on adding whatever rights required. I can keep performing the transactions. Probably I can go and edit, open the the close period, and I can probably go back and edit some data in the close period. I can inflate the value, right? So that control is very much required. And third one that talks about on the termination, someone resigns the organization, and how do we ensure that the access is being revoked so that nobody is misusing it, the user ID, to probably do some unauthorized activities. And then on the password controls, very required, because for the cyber point of view, the password control is very much required, because the password does not have a good control, and people can probably try guessing the password, and they can probably get the access to the applications. System change control, as I briefed you earlier. So some of the critical controls we look at is that who can probably modify the logic in the ERP, and who can probably test it, and who can probably make the changes to the production environment. Is there a proper approval to it? And then is there a segregation between the production environment and the developing environment? Because developers just come in and then do some changes in the production data directly, that leads to a greater exposure to the risk, because none of the finance team or the business heads will have an awareness of what is being modified in the production system directly, and thereby there is required to have a segregation between the development and the production environment, so that a person develops something and he tests that, and thereby he ensures that it doesn't introduce more and more of errors. Thereby my system gets into a lot of issues, and thereby my efficiency of the day-to-day routines, it gets affected. Yeah, as I talked earlier, that while we do in the financial audit will identify each and every process control lapses, right? So then we identify ERP which is required to be scoped in, And on those ERP, then we go back and we understand this general IT, how it has been performed. So some deviations to such generic IT, these IT risk will probably will evaluate, what can go wrong. For example, in my change control, if I say that, I'm not aware of what changes have happened to my ERP, then that gives me a lot of, the points on how do I rely upon all the automated controls. For example, yeah, we do have some tools. For example, in ERP like SAP and Oracle, we do have some JD Edwards for that matter. We also have internal tools where we run that tool, the script I would rather call as. We run that script in the system, and we identify all the configurations, what all has been implemented in the ERP, and based on that, we recommend to the client.
Just to add on, so first important control that we look for over here is whether somebody has logged the changes in the system. So you could also not log a particular change to be recorded. So that removes the audit trail completely. Now, if the audit trail is not available, it is removed, then whatever script you use, whatever technology tool that you use will not find out what changes are being done. So that is a clear failure in terms of internal control. Correct. Exactly. Most of the, but in practical scenarios, most of the companies, do not log because this particular log uses a lot of server space and storage, which kind of pulls down the performance of the system. Now, if that has to happen, we look for alternate controls where they have a clear authorization mechanism, where they have a ticketing tool based on which the changes are implemented, and they have clear segregation of duties where the changes are being performed or developed by independent people, then we are somewhat okay. Otherwise, no change logs, it's very, very difficult. So we are also only talking about changes to the program or the configuration settings within the ERP. There are even more critical areas like changes to database. If somebody kind of accesses database from the backend, makes corrections to the data, that's even more riskier. And if that change is not logged, then whatever number that I'm kind of reporting and pulling out is.
So, but that's what we also recommend to many companies that you don't need to have like a robust like a ERP or some additional tool to track all the changes. As long as they have a good control that you management is able to track log all the changes whatever they do it, and then they ensure they do an adequate review of such the logging. Because many small companies they will not be able to implement the bigger tools to log and do a review of it, but the risk is always there. But how do we address the risk? Is something which probably we can discuss and see how it's required to be implemented. Either a separate tool is required, or a manual tracking can also probably be beneficial. It depends upon number of how frequent the changes are being made, and how frequent probably the changes to database is also being made. Based on that, a call can be obtained on
But
that.
yeah, it is of late been becoming a challenge today.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. And there are companies which are huge in size and which kind of maintain and run their own application system. It is in-house developed. Hmm. Correct.
Oh.
Hmm. Correct.
But there are some ERP which will record all these changes in the OS level. But there are some in-house application which will not have that feature as well. But while I develop an application, any changes I perform to the code itself, right? I don't need a separate log of it. It gets recorded in the OS level. What are the files that got changed, and what is the timestamp who has changed it? But many companies are not aware of that various techniques how it can be logged within the ERP itself. But probably the developers can probably try doing it, but companies are not aware of such things that can happen. So everybody have a thought that a separate tool is required, but version controls, right? Any version control tool if you have, The version control tool itself lists to all the version changes that have occurred in a period of time. Same way, the OS level itself, a lot of changes can be recorded. It just depends upon the how the ERP is being developed, for that matter. So once we do an audit on these IT areas, and then we go back and then we do concluding on the IT controls, on the design, how it has been designed, how it's been implemented, and how it has been operated over the period, right? So any questions? Yep. And on the regulatory framework, so these are the various regulatory framework which many countries are trying to adopt. I don't want to go in detail about each and every country. Probably some countries are they are trying to implement the regulatory framework. I'll just talk about on 2 to 3 countries. The one is on the China, the cyber security law, which has been passed in December 2016. So China, the one thing is that they have made it a point that any company for that matter, be it in China or outside the China, anybody who is probably providing a services to China, and where thereby they're involved in the person information, they have to adhere to this particular law. If they're not adhering to this law, either they'll be fined or they'll be banned for performing the services. For example, any device manufacturer. There are some device manufacturers outside of China who are probably, for example, Philippines or Germany, who are trying to probably provide to China. Even they are also required to be follow or get adhere to the China the framework of the data privacy. Yeah, it is in line to the European GDPR, where they are trying the China data security law is in line to the European GDPR as well. And top of it, there are also other the requirement as from China point of view, which is required to be other, which is still is under debatable, because it is not viable for all the companies to probably undergo or rather implement such a vigorous security laws. And still they are discussing on it, but China is very strict that that any company who is providing the services uh, to any means for that matter is required to adhere to this law, who are involved with some personal information for that matter. Yeah. Yeah, even that also is getting covered. So even there, that is getting covered. Server will be there. So anybody who is probably managing the server outside the China location. So anywhere they're involved in some way or the other, where they'll be able to access or probably get to know the information or the personal data information, they are required to adhere to this particular governance structure, the security framework.
Typically, from an Indian point of view, this will have, or this is already having a major impact on BPOs and IPO companies, which are primarily into data processing. They kind of process data for these organizations which are abroad, right? So that's where there is a clear deviation on whether I process data, okay, but whether I store your data, whether I control your data. So there is a thin client environment which works, where I kind of attach myself into their environment remotely, and then I do the processing. Today, most of the BPOs are into this thin client, or what we call as virtual desktop interface environment, where we locally sit and we connect to their IT environment through a VPN, or through this thin client network, and then process it in their environment only. We do not store data, we do not have control over that data. But I need to get my infrastructure right if I
Yeah.
need to continue doing business with these countries, so that I don't own or control this data. Because the moment I start controlling data, there are a lot of other compliance regulations which I will have.
So from the device manufacturer, online provisions, all the e-commerce, the websites, and also by anyone who's protecting the data, that's a server locations, everyone is required to come under this particular, they have to follow this particular law, and they have to be in line with that for China. Going on to Philippines one, they are, as of now, I think there are about 4.4 billion that they're able to generate the revenue, and they're expecting to double the revenue somewhere about 8 billion. That's what I read by 2020. There are 42 million of users in Philippines who are on the social media. So the importance, or rather, the people getting into social media in Philippines is much more, and thereby they've come on this particular the regulation of the act, where they are, they want to ensure that each and every person's information that is put on the social media, be it individual, be it the entity, they are required to follow, they are required to get adhere to this particular information act. Low cost, yeah, exactly. Now they are, yeah, so they are also expecting that to double the revenue by 8 billion by 2020, and they're also expect, as of now there are 42 million of users only on social media in Philippines. So that's been a huge number for them, right? So going on the Japan one, and Japan also had an act been amended, where they also brought in, the section on their law which talks about on, the data leakage point of view, like, what are the ways through which a data has been leaked, or what are ways through which a data can probably, when the confidential they got compromised. So those are also being added. Who was the responsible party to it? Is there unauthorized access to it? So a person who has been responsible to it should be fined, and what are the punishment is required? What are the various, the the directions that the law is going to take it towards? So all that has been included in the Japan's act, and that is also is required to be adhered by the individual as well as by the companies. And moving on to the, yeah, just the last slide, yeah. And then South Africa and Australia, Mexico, they are on the verge of it, and Australia again they have implemented that. So India, we are right now, trying to probably get that released by this year end. And as of now, the only thing is that, RBI has mandated that all the NBFC and all this and all the house finance companies, they should probably undergo the RBA assessment based on the regular that is being based on the notification that is being released, and they have to adhere, and they have to probably report it by next year June, and June and September based on their revenue. Yeah, self-assessment, and they should do a gap assessment, and they have to submit a report to the RBI by next year by June. And some companies, based on the revenue, they have to be submit the gap as by September, right? And I think these are just the overview about GDPR. I think GDPR, I think we talked in length again. GDPR is something, any European companies, probably, from anywhere across the world, whoever has been involved in probably, providing a service to the European company, thereby they have an access, or rather they store, or they get to have a visibility on the personal data information of the European people, and they are required to again, adhere to the GDPR. And so these are the various domains that gets covered in that. And I think currently, in India we are about expecting there are a lot of companies, where it's required to undergo the GDPR assessment. They have to do a self assessment, and they have to provide a report by March of May. I think it's May 2018, where they have to submit the report. European citizens. India has not yet come with such law. Yeah. Sorry, come again. I didn't get that question.
Any data that has a European touch point. For example, you have the employee payroll of all employees who are working in the European geography, or the European Union geography to be more specific. If one is a European Union country, it is
Yeah.
if it contains data pertaining to EU, yes,
Yeah.
EU, then it has to be.
I mean, that's a requirement of the European companies.
Benchmark it, or they baseline it as the most stringent regulation, and based on this, other regulations are being developed.
Yeah.
So yeah, and that is more also culturally so, because the Europeans are very culturally very not very okay. They are not very open in sharing more information or data, and that is why this particular law has come in. So even though the UK had moved into Brexit and they are out of the European Union, they are still following the same GDPR, and they are okay to imbibe the same law and pass a new law.
But still, UK is trying to get their own laws. They're trying to probably bring their own
They
law.
just want to replicate the same law.
Same law.
Because they are also one of the key signatories for the GDPR.
So GDPR, the European one, is basically only for the European the information, and any company in any country across the world who is dealing with that, they are required to be in comply with it. And this again on the NIST, this is mainly for the US. US right now, they are more any ISO certification, they would rather, they are not that much, concerned about it. They want all the major companies, they want to adhere to the NIST framework, and so this again in comparison to ISO, where in ISO we cover the entire broad range of the overall organization, whereas in this framework it focuses only on the specific ERPs, on a specific process. It can probably, it can cater to. Whereas ISO, we have to complete, we have to ensure, we are covering across all the process in the company. That's the difference between NIST and the ISO. And moving on to Cortec committee report is one addition to it, where, the cyber security function is also required into the risk assessment, which was not in there earlier, which has been right now, amended to it. And IT framework for NBFC sector, as I briefed you earlier, they have released that by June 2018. All the NBFC companies is required to submit a gap assessment report, and similarly, for the other the Housing Finance Board also, they have similar framework where they have to submit a report by June 2018. And there's like a kind of like a for insurers where they have to submit the report on various days. So I mean, it depends on each and every company.
The regulatory bodies in India after RBI has now started releasing frameworks, cybersecurity frameworks, and it's just for the board to adopt and then conduct periodic review meetings on whether the framework is procedures like the policies have been adhered to. More interestingly, AICPA has recently released a cybersecurity framework for organizations to follow, and it has to be necessarily and mandatorily be signed by a CPA only, right? So over time, we could also see a similar standard coming out in India, where the ICAI will roll out similar such framework, and where chartered accountants are required to sign, primarily from an assurance perspective. So this, the AICPA's cybersecurity framework report, audit report, will have to be filed as part of the annual report of the company, and that's a clear standard which has come out now, which AICPA has taken lead on. I think IAAB is also looking at something similar.
Good. So any questions on this further? That we are done.
I think
Good.
it was quite a long
Yeah.
session. Thank you very much.
Thank you.